Hey, listeners, welcome to Idio Talk, or should I say Video Talk, one of our little side project episodes. Little? Why am I saying little? These are not little.
I don't know.
These are sometimes our most substantial episodes, at least in terms of length and girth.
Yes, absolutely.
But welcome to Idio Talk. I am Walker Glenn.
I'm Zach Glenn.
And listeners, if you are just jumping in, can't imagine that, but I don't know. Every episode is probably somebody's first episode. This is one of our Video Talk episodes where Zach and I discuss a movie that we're both obsessed with or is very important to kind of our shared sensibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of our shared askew view of the world. Often it's a movie from childhood. Earlier this season, we talked about the film Clifford, also King of Comedy. Not a childhood staple, but definitely a shared obsession.
Oh, yeah.
And last season, our movie episodes were all about the late 80s and 90s Batman films. But normally, this show is a music podcast. This season, we're discussing the music of Fiona Apple. Last season, we did the music of Radiohead. About 35 Radiohead episodes sitting out there for you to catch up on. But every once in a while, we like to just, change pace a little bit and talk about a movie. We're well-rounded people, aren't we, Zach? We don't just listen to music.
No, not at all.
Do you think there's any people that are like, I don't watch, I just listen to music. I don't read. I don't watch things.
Yeah, I do.
You think so? Decidedly?
Maybe not decidedly, but I had a music teacher who was one of the least well-rounded people I've ever met. And one of the
he was a square.
Yeah, he was exactly. He was definitely probably the best in terms of just skill musician I've ever met or hung around. But no interest in anything. Actually, he was a pretty big reader too, I would say, but also limited to like the history of music and like different types of music theory stuff. So it's pretty rare, but I would say most of the artists though that we've covered on the show, even just Fiona Apple or, the boys of Radiohead, they seem to have a wide array of interest. And I think that's pretty key to pulling in interesting inputs into whatever it is that your craft is kind of focused on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, obviously Fiona Apple, amazing poet and just, amazing at a lot of different things. But obviously poetry and songwriting, there's a very strong overlap in terms of Venn diagram. You could argue, are they really different or not? But I think with Fiona, it's very clear. We talked about Maya Angelou, the music of John Lennon, and just so many other different artists. And then just sticking with the songwriter kind of frontman, like Tom York, we know has a huge interest in a lot of different stuff. So I do think it's really critical. It's probably not an absolute, but I think it's in my experience, it makes for a more well-rounded individual.
Certainly with art, right? I mean, I certainly think that it's like you need to take in things outside your immediate bubble. I mean, This comes up in comedy a lot, right? It's like you gotta have some interest in the world around you or live some kind of life to then commentate about it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like, look, I'm in the Bay Area. There's famously a rivalry between the northern and southern parts of the state of California. Now, I think Southern California would say this is a one-sided rivalry. But Zach's in Sacramento. I am in the Bay Area. We are NorCal to our bones.
Oh, yeah. It's a different world down there.
That's right. That's right. I get down there and I'm like, there's a Southern California? Who the hell knew? Bakersfield? What is this shit?
I know.
Now, Fresno. Is Fresno Southern or North? That's Central California, isn't it?
The Central, yeah. Yeah.
That's really the bastard child of that is the Ramsey Snow of
or the Tuttle kid from True Detective season 1 that they keep a secret.
Wait, Zach, I'm totally interrupting myself, but I feel like we were having a real larf on text recently, and maybe this is something we'll have to cut out because maybe this was gossip about like real people, but we were talking about what is we were making fun of someone and referring to them as a bastard child. And I was like, their last name is this. And it was like, what is the what is the like? Because in Game of Thrones, like bastards from the north are given
Snow.
the last name Snow.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember this?
No.
I feel like we were like, his last name is Sand or something.
I make a vague bell, but I can't remember.
Well, whatever. Listeners, just know that we're funny off mic too, I guess. Yeah. But
we're shitty
listeners, if you had been there and we could remember what we were talking about, my God, the laughs you would have.
Oh,
yeah.
Man.
If we could supply a context and tell this
a joke,
yeah, we're so close. We have like one of the 3 essential ingredients for an anecdote, which is a vague memory that something happened. Boy, what the hell? But like sometimes I have done now, obviously, tons of very funny comedians in Los Angeles, but
yeah,
sometimes I have done shows with folks from LA up here in the Bay Area, and I've noticed there is a tendency to have a set sometimes where it's like all your jokes are about like going on auditions and stuff. And
okay.
I don't need to have done commercial auditions to appreciate a funny story or experience, but I don't know, observations about the minutia of that, maybe not that universal or relatable. And my point is that you've got to do other things. You got to go on Tinder dates,
right?
And then have observations about Tinder to do comedy people relate to, seemingly.
I love there's a bit in the last season of 30 Rock where the last season of 30 Rock was made in 2012, and the presidential election ends up being decided by Jenna Maroney. It all hinges on her, and there's this like sideline bit where Tracy is trying to predict how the whole country is going to go, and he like does it like down by each region of the state, and I don't know if Tracy Morgan wrote it or if the writers of that show are just so tapped into whatever. I don't know. I mean, Tracy Morgan's obviously an amazing writer and comedian himself, but it's so funny when he's talking about like people in Cincinnati versus people in other parts of Ohio. And then he has this one bit where he's like, because it all comes down to Florida, and he's like, people in northern Florida I could never quite fully figure out, you know? And I'm just like, God, what an amazing career that would be to just get to know the continental US. I mean, it's just such a large country. And, you know, obviously it's for the sake of a bit, but I also feel like there's a lot of like tangibility and realness to it, because Tracy Morgan's been a touring stand-up comic for, 20, 30 years at this point. I don't know. It's really impressive, like kind of quick moment, but I'm like, ooh, I feel like there's a lot of substance to this.
Yeah, I mean, it would be an amazing career to just make incorrect predictions about how elections will go. And I feel like America has a huge, incredibly well-paid industry.
Yeah.
I don't know, Zach, if you remember 2016.
Oh, yeah.
But it went differently than most people thought it was going to go.
Yeah, including myself. Yeah.
Yeah, including me. I know. I really wanted to be able to be one of those, like, like I'm a true cynic and I see America for what I saw this coming a mile away. But I was shocked.
Now nothing will surprise you.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I do find myself, and look, we love to get political on this show, where, absolutely. There is another presidential election a year from now, right? Mm-hmm. Almost to the day. And certainly as when people are listening to this, and, and it's coming down to, will the crazy old man or the slightly crazier old man take it this time? And, you pick who's who for you. But I already have found myself saying, like, I don't see how Donald Trump can win again. But it is always tempered with a CYA of like, but I've thought that before. Basically the lamest prediction possible, where I'm like, man, this could really go two ways.
Well, I was really proud of myself for a comment I left on the Smiles Reddit page, where it was like, I think I sent it to you, a screenshot of it, but the post was like this really like sincere, heartfelt. That was like, the band could put out another album this year, but also they might not.
Yeah.
There's still October, or there's still November and December left. You know, that's a long time. And it was like, but it was like written as if it was like this like late breaking story. And I commented, and it's now up to 25 upvotes. Late breaking news. The band could do something at some point.
Wait, you wrote this?
Yeah, I commented that on it.
Oh,
it was
nice.
the dumbest post I've ever seen. It was just like, they could do something, but they might not. And it was like, yeah, no shit. Like, something could happen or something might not. That's not a hot prediction. And I was like 50-50, because I really, as somebody that actively posts on like different radio or different Reddit boards that I like, not like super frequently, but like I'll put thought into like what I want to say. I don't think it's like cool to just go around like teasing people that have also seemingly done it, but this was so stupid. It was like, yeah, like something could happen or something might not. It was so dumb. People really
I feel like well, first of all, thank you for maintaining our celebrity status on Reddit, because I have not been active on any of the boards lately. But I was thinking, the person who I most like to dunk on their Reddit posts is you. And Zach will say something that I totally agree with, and I like to just comment like, "This is stupid," just like the most. Or I think one time you like made a really well articulated and specific point about some Radiohead thing, and I just wrote, "This is insane."
Yeah, that's
you sound crazy.
It got -9 upvotes.
Yeah, everyone was just like, what a dick. Zach, I'm actually glad that you brought up Radiohead.
Well, I brought up the Smile, but yeah.
Oh, fair enough. Well, by bringing up the Smile, you are always bringing up Radiohead, right?
2/5. Yeah, totally.
Now, I had a little Radiohead experience recently out in the world. Not
okay.
I would say not.
Another barbecue, or
not as big as the listeners. Go listen to the anti-Radiohead hate crime I experienced at a supposed friend's barbecue by listening to our episode analyzing Radiohead with Brad Osborne. This was not as vicious of an attack on my Radiohead fandom, but it was kind of an experience of having. You know what I was, Zach? I was a victim also. I was so. You know, listeners know I love to go out into the world and be a victim. And this time was no exception. and it's, you know, look, it's not easy for a straight white millennial man to find himself a victim that often, at least culturally. And nowadays, yeah.
Can't a man just be a man?
Can a man just, yeah. I mean, of course, you know, people are always getting mad at me about things I can't say, but I still go there.
So what happened?
And of course, the job of the comedian is to be mindlessly insensitive.
Oh yeah.
while reinforcing old bigotries. This is the job of the comedian, and I embrace it. And so, yeah, I'm fine. Okay, listeners, I'm kidding. But so often, Zach, when I'm a victim, it is not because of something inherent to my identity, but it is because people will say something slightly rude or condescending about Radiohead and how much I love them. You know? Yeah. And this time I was a victim of ageism related to Radiohead. So I don't think we've talked about this, but I am working at an elementary school right now in my day job. You know, until we get enough subscribers to justify a merch run and a Patreon and a separate OnlyFans. Zach and I each doing an OnlyFans where we post pictures of our tiny butts. Right now, it's important that I have a day job, and I work at an after school program at an elementary school, and the program has a couple of like high school interns who help out a couple days a week. And first of all, I, never talk to them. So the story that I'm about to share with you is the first and last conversation I have had with one of these high school interns. And I feel like that is a silently mutually agreed upon dynamic between the two of us. I don't have anything to say to them. They don't have anything they want to hear from me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I also live right by a high school in Oakland, and nothing has made me more aware of my advancing age than just when you, as an adult, when you become invisible to young people, meaning that like I feel like I could walk out of my house nude and screaming and they would not look up. Like, it's like I'm that profoundly uninteresting. Just my existence is that profoundly uninteresting to people 20 and under.
Right.
In any case, one of these high school interns walks in. Now, like this Gen Z and below. I don't know if high school people currently in high school are part of Gen Z or if they're part of the
Alpha.
Gen Alpha, which is Ollie's generation, or if they're on the cusp. But in any case, I'm sure you've noticed they are dressing in early 2000s fashion. Cargo pants are back. Big, giant cargo pants are back. Like Hot Topic, like, pants with all the crazy straps and zippers and shit, like all that kind of stuff. Okay. Yeah, which is tough. And there's a certain comfort in seeing things come back into fashion and just like comfortably knowing like, oh, I don't have to try to do this. Like I'm just when I was a lad, skinny jeans came into style, and now I'm going to wear some variation of that and a flannel for the rest of my life. And that's going to be fine. And people will be able to very quickly identify what was cool when I attempting to be cool, right? In any case, while I'm not a fan of the giant pants and things like that, and I do look askance at these young people wearing those things, and just because I've already learned those lessons, and you wish you could sit them down and say, "Oh, honey, you don't have to do this," but you can't. They wouldn't listen to you. But they also wear a lot of stuff from our time, like a lot of stuff from our youth is now nostalgic.
Right.
And that's very interesting. And I guess this inevitably happens to everybody. And I have mixed feelings about it. I'm like, oh, it's fun that I can walk into a cool coffee shop and hear Blink 182 playing. But it also, of course, makes me feel ancient. Right. So this high schooler wearing a very cool Radiohead shirt. It's a Radiohead shirt that is a close-up of Thom's face, possibly a still image from the No Surprises video, but it's like blown out and kind of like that like photocopied like 90s style, where the saturation of the image is like turned way up, and it's basically just kind of like, this like stencil is like Tom's face. Yeah, purple shirt, says Radiohead, and we're passing by each other, going opposite directions. Again, don't even know this person's name. Never spoken to them in my life. And I go, oh, cool Radiohead shirt. And she goes, what? And I go, oh, I like the Radiohead shirt. And she's like, oh, okay. And then I like can't help myself. And I go, yeah, they're like my favorite band. And she goes, I didn't even know adults had heard of this band. Listeners, that dead space was left in intentionally. I want you to feel the wince and the just speechlessness that Zach felt. Zach, please speak on it.
Well, just to take ownership of a band and assume that adults hadn't heard of them, but to do zero research to find out when their most successful run of albums were, is frustrating to me.
Oh my God, Zach. I mean, I couldn't believe internally how mad I was. Like, it was like
very indignant.
I didn't know adults had heard of this band. The people in the band are all in their 50s.
I know.
When do you think they were popular? Like, it took a thing that I love, that it's like that high schoolers are still discovering Radiohead, something that I think we've talked about from Reddit. Like, it's like,
yes, it's
like
definitely still happening. It's awesome.
Totally. And it like speaks to what I perceive to be like a timeless nature to a lot of their best work. It's hard to say that objectively, because you love the stuff you love, you get a certain age, and I think every old person has some variation of the experience of like, hey, check this out, it really rocks, and a kid like staring at you like you're a fucking idiot, right? But I do think Radiohead
I think they're timeless that way.
Yeah, and their sphere of influence. I think bands that are starting now probably still really love Radiohead. So it's always a nice, pleasant surprise to find out that people still give a shit about this thing that I love. But to say I didn't know adults have heard of this band, it's like, pull your head out of your ass. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, what? I mean, seriously,
I don't know.
Honestly, where do you think this person thinks Radiohead is from?
I don't know.
Do
Maybe
they think they are a new band?
On her shirt is like a new image or something.
Yeah. Or and the shirt is from like OK Computer era Tom. So are they like watching No Surprises and being like, what a cool thing that came out yesterday?
Yeah. Wow, this video has 50 million views and it just came out?
Yeah. And like, I mean, honestly, I think this is the thing of, because people discover things on TikTok all the time now.
Yeah.
So it's like Portlandia or whatever. It's like, they're not watching it on cable. They're not sitting down and fucking watching it on IFC. It gets clipped and put on TikTok and then has like, I feel like people even like, that's like part of the persistence of the American Office is it's like, it's on TikTok. But Zach, I actually left a part out of this story. What this high schooler did, they did a thing that I've always heard shitty, basically guys like the stereotype of guys like us who care super deeply about like a band will then sexistly quiz women in a band t-shirt about like to test the authenticity of their fanship, right?
Oh, so I've never done that before.
No, neither have I. But you know, are you aware of this kind of like stereotype? Oh, okay, because it's like something the Hard Times riffs
so I've probably done it.
I doubt it. But like the thing of like you see like a young lady in a Nirvana shirt and you're like, name 5 of their songs. I would never.
Is it an aggressive way to flirt? Maybe like negging.
Sure, probably.
Okay.
It's a way to like establish some sort of dominance as an expert. Yeah, about a thing. This high school girl did that to me, and Zach, I did it. I
would have participated.
Yeah, I like the transition, the immediate change from hey, cool Radiohead shirt to the stress, to the stress I felt to like prove that I know Radiohead to this high schooler that I have, again, don't know their name, don't care about them at all. But like when I was like, cool Radiohead shirt, they went, can you name 5 of their songs? And
what
then
5
it was
did you name?
I don't know, but Zach, it was stressful because it was one of those things where people are like, because it's one of those things where someone's like, name a state, and you're like, Canada. Like you can't, like, it's like, you know what I mean? Like basic knowledge that you have can suddenly kind of like fly out the window. It's like how people like bomb Jeopardy questions that everyone on the panel knows.
Totally.
But like I got 5 songs, but it was like I remember as I was saying them, I was like, I'm picking weird songs. It was just like whatever ones jumped into my head.
You're like punch up at a wedding. We suck young blood. Sit down, stand up.
See, you're doing
The Tourist and Fitter Happier.
Yeah, or like Pop is Dead, like the single they released before Pablo Honey came out that is like considered the cringiest song they ever did.
But then those high schoolers still had more dominance over you, and whatever songs you named, they're like, those aren't songs.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's like, oh, those are all just TikTok videos. Yeah, those are all 30-second ditties that this new band has released on TikTok. And so not only did I name 5 songs, like it is so pathetic how much I needed to prove that I liked Radiohead to this high schooler. Zach, I mentioned the podcast.
Oh, okay.
Why? And this is the first and last time I have told. And also, I edit the podcast at work. I'll sit there. If I have extra time in my day, I'll sit there and edit the podcast. And if people go, "What are you doing?" I go, "Editing a podcast."
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I don't say editing my podcast. Yeah. I say editing a pod. Could be editing
one of the many podcasts that I edit.
Yeah, exactly. But this person goes, "I didn't know adults even like this band," and I went, "I have a Radiohead podcast."
Yes.
And she ran away. No, I don't. It's just like, it was the most awkward conversation of my life. And I walked away just feeling so utterly violated that it's like I walked away. It was so it was gaslighting. To use the parlance of this generation, I was just nagged and gaslit by a high schooler. Like, I tried to connect with her on her level as two Radiohead fans. I didn't, Zach, go, "Oh, you're too young to have heard of it. Oh, did you get that show did you get that shirt at Target? Do you even know Radiohead? Can you name 5 of their songs? Do you have a Radiohead No. I'm not here
That's how most people would assume it would go.
Exactly, Zach. But I just was like, hey, we're too nothing about our backgrounds is the same, except that we both love the head. And I'm going to treat you as and I'm going to treat you as an equal. I'm not going to throw that I have a Radiohead podcast in your face. Right. I'm not going to throw that I am a self-styled expert on this band and their side projects in your face. And not only that, Zach, if I see you at a Radiohead or if I see you at the Smile concert and I catch one of this band's fans, one of these Gen X or millennial fans, right, who looks like me, one of these flannel bros talking down to you, that's when I'm gonna step in and be my ass an ally and go, hey, we're just all here because we love Thom, right?
Yeah.
But
I've had to step in on Reddit once before with that, but please keep going.
No, that's it. But it's just like, but it's clear to me that this is a one-sided arrangement. Like, this is what it feels like to be old in America. It's like they want to sweep you away with the trash, don't want to acknowledge. Like, we've had guests on who are older than us and have been into Radiohead way longer than we have, and they treat us with respect, but we also treat them with the reverence of having done their time and paved the way.
No, totally.
I don't know. I'm sickened.
The more things change, the more things stay the same. Like, we have all these high expectations about the new generation. Well, about our generation, the way that we're going to surpass, previous generations and how we can talk about things, be open, different styles of discipline or understanding of different types of people, whatever, pick your semi-political issue or political cause or whatever. And yet, now that we're getting, let's see, I'm 34, you're 30, are you 37?
Yes, sir.
So I'm about to be, in the back half of my 30s. But yeah, I mean, and then it's like you have this interaction and it's like, oh, no, things aren't changing. People are still shitty.
I think high schoolers being shitty is
not new.
Not new and is not going anywhere. But
yeah.
No, please go ahead.
I mean, this isn't really along the same lines, but it's not having any kids of my own, like, who would, be in high school or have high school friends over or whatever. It is very limited engagement and interaction to like spend time around teens. I think we've mentioned on the show that like we have our youngest sister is 20. So that's kind of like a nice insight into that world, you know, limited though it may be, like might not get as much exposure otherwise. But we had, Kailani and I had, I say her niece, but it's our niece, I guess, but her sister's eldest daughter over on Saturday night, and we watched Alien, and it was her first time. And it was really, she's only 15 and really, really, really smart girl. It was really, really fun to watch somebody that like appreciates like classic movies and is getting into them, like see it for the first time and hear what she thought about it. So, you know, it can go both ways.
Yeah, but Zach, you raise a really, of course it can. And like, I mean, like, I guess
I love your story.
Well, thank you. Cool story, Hansel. But I guess that, I guess though that I am specifically like, kind of concerned about not just young people, but this generation of young people. And your Alien example is a good counter example of neither of us were born when the movie Alien came out. And when we got into that franchise, I don't think either of us went, oh, this movie came out yesterday.
No.
And that is the thing that I really am having a hard time with, is it's like, does this generation think that things start existing the moment they become aware of them? And that's crazy.
No, but I think that I kind of did, maybe they do, but I think that in a way, and this is something I've gotten a lot better about when I find my way into something classically loved. So listeners know we both, but I love Stanley Kubrick films. He's been dead for 24 years. Listeners know, you know, we love Radiohead or whatever. I do think that I've gotten generally more aware of like, oh, just because I'm finding my way to something that is beloved, but like, I don't know, like Radiohead still, we've talked about a bunch of times that they occupy like this totally mainstream, but like semi, not underground, but like alternative maybe or something like that, like status. And they've been able to maintain that, I think, very carefully, because I wonder where that person did get that shirt, because I don't think Radiohead merch is available in like Target and all big box retailers.
I'm not sure. It looked vintage. Like, I don't know if it was, awesome. But it's like, it was like, was legitimately like a really rad shirt that either was styled in a way to like look like authentic 90s Radiohead merch, or was in fact that.
But yeah, I don't know. I remember just being like, actually, Brad Osborne said this on the episode that you mentioned earlier. Like, he said something like, when he got into them, he started proselytizing them like all Radiohead fans do. And that made me laugh so hard, because I was like, oh man, I could definitely relate to that. So I think that is an exercise of ego too, of being like, hey, I just found out about this thing. Let me tell you about it. Or I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, you just kind of like, yeah. So I don't know. I think that's an area I've at least strove to have improved. I don't know what the right wording is, but yeah, that's a pretty big manifestation of ego.
I'll tell you this. I've seen this high schooler wearing the Radiohead shirt a couple times since, and now I like look at the floor when they're doing it and walk by. I just really got my ass handed to me.
That is really funny.
I think this counts as a mini episode of our Radiohead season on this episode of Video Talk. Should we talk about the subject at hand today? Should we talk Bottle Rocket?
I think we should.
Well, just like in the most general terms possible, Bottle Rocket is a favorite movie of Zach and I's for a very long time. This movie came out in 1996, but we discovered it, I would say, in the early 2000s. And we'll get into like how we were hipped to this movie. But Zach, should we like let the folks know? Do you think we should let them know kind of a brief summation of what the movie's about, or a brief summation of kind of who made it and its background?
No, give them a quick summary of the plot, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, I'm just going to refer to character names and not talk about, you know, who's playing who or directors or anything like that, in case this is anybody's, is coming to this totally blind. Bottle Rocket is a movie about three friends in small town suburbia, Texas, basically kind of to escape their boredom and suburban ennui, maybe also kind of like lives of privilege to some extent for some of them. These three characters, Dignan, Anthony, and Bob, embark on a life of a mishap-filled and ill-fated life of crime. These are not people who are turning to crime because, they're growing up in an environment where that is the only option that they see.
Yeah, it's not The Wire.
Yeah, it's not a mechanism of survival. It's it's played
a mechanism of choice.
Yeah, a mechanism of choice and of fantasy. I believe the tagline of this movie is "They're not really criminals, but everybody's got to have a dream," which I think is a great tagline. Not really a tagline that I think tonally suits the movie, but is a good kind of encapsulation of the joke of this.
I think
movie.
that was the tagline on our VHS copy, actually.
That's right. Sure was. So yeah, Dignan is the kind of the self-styled alpha of this group. He is the mastermind who is making the plans. His long-suffering kind of best friend is Anthony, who is probably the smarter one and knows a little better, but is very loyal to his friend Dignan and is willing to doesn't have enough going on in his own life that he's willing to embark on this life of crime with Dignan. And then Bob Mapplethorpe.
I think we can just say too that Dignan is played by Owen Wilson and Anthony is played by his younger brother Luke. I think we could at least say that much.
Okay, fair enough. So fair enough. Yeah. So this is the debut of the Wilson brothers.
Yeah.
They're not playing brothers in the movie, but the chemistry between these two characters is
unbelievable.
Unbelievable. The back and forth is so natural.
Rich.
And Zach and I really consider this a brothers movie.
Yes, absolutely.
And anyway, so just the movie's not a super plotty movie. It's very much kind of a 90s hangout movie, indie comedy, and has that vibe. But in terms of story, these three rob a bookstore in the town they live in. Go on the lam. That is a quote. It's not at all clear that anyone is pursuing
them.
the perpetrators of this crime, but they go on the lam. And then while they are hiding out in another unnamed Texas town, things kind of deteriorate between the three of them. The group kind of breaks up. Bob is their getaway driver. He ditches out on them. And leaves them stranded in this town. Anthony falls in love with a maid who works at the hotel they're hiding out at. The group falls apart, and eventually they all come back together back in their hometown to pull a big job to rob a cold storage, Hinckley Cold Storage. And this is all under the tutelage of Abe Henry, who is Dignan's hero, supposed crime boss Abe Henry, who is Dignan is kind of under the tutelage of, and the job goes belly up. They are. I mean, it should be. They are completely
inept.
Inept. Thank you. That was the word I was searching for. They're totally inept as criminals. The job goes belly up, and Dignan takes the fall. Ends up going to prison, and that's Bottle Rocket. And we're going to talk about it in more detail, just the vibe of this movie, and of course our favorite parts and stuff. But that's what the movie is about. How did I do? Any big things I missed that you think we want to cover in the general?
No, not at all. I mean, Abe Henry is played by James Caan. He's sort of the face. I think listeners. I mean, now if you watch it for the first time, it's not necessarily a who's who. I think you would definitely recognize Owen and Luke Wilson. And I think you can't help but recognize that the side character Future Man is played by another Wilson brother. He has not had an illustrious career by any means, but they just have such a distinctive drawl and look and jawline. Yeah. But James Caan is sort of the draw, and he sort of did it as a favor, I think, to producer Mel Brooks. James L. Brooks, not Mel Brooks. James L. Brooks.
He's the star attached to, that they to get this movie made, and at the time that it came out, he would be the only face that you
Yes.
knew. But Zach, I think that's kind of naturally getting us into the who's who of this movie, because it's not just the first movie of the Wilson brothers.
Totally.
It's a first of another very prominent voice in American cinema. Why don't you talk about, who's behind the camera and crew? Like, what's the background of this movie?
Well, it was directed by Wes Anderson. So Wes Anderson, still very active filmmaker today. I would say up until maybe the last 5 years or so, I would say a very, very critically lauded, just a very famous and prolific American filmmaker. This is his debut film. The screenplay was written by Wes Anderson and Owen Wilson. And, we'll probably talk about it as we go. I don't know how much we want to talk about all his other movies, but I think Wes Anderson's first 4 or 5 movies were co-written by Owen Wilson. I know
it's actually just the first 3.
Oh, okay. Because Life Aquatic's Noah Baumbach he co-wrote with, right?
Yes, and Life Aquatic followed Royal Tenenbaums, right?
Yeah.
So it's just the first 3, and I don't believe that Owen Wilson has been the co-writer on anything since Royal Tenenbaums, although he has appeared in movies since. But
yeah, in this movie,
including Life Aquatic.
I'm not going to go through the cast, because we covered like kind of the 3. But this movie does a thing I would say the Coen brothers also do very well, and maybe Wes Anderson, pulled from them. Coen brothers famously like to set their movies in kind of middle America. This is set in like northern Texas, and it just does this wonderful thing that I think Wes Anderson and the Coens do so well of blending in people of either a different ethnicity other than the white male leads, or just people that aren't actors, right? And they don't have like prominent lead roles, although the third friend of the group, Bob Mapplethorpe, is played by Robert Musgrave, and he has only 2 film credits that I could find, and he's an excellent actor, I think, in this. He puts in a great performance. But Kumar,
now I read on Reddit he was in one of Wes Anderson's most recent features, that he has a small part in The French Dispatch.
Oh, I saw The French Dispatch. I don't remember him in it.
Well, I don't know. I didn't verify it on IMDb or anything.
No, I believe
he's
it.
like a cab driver or something in The French Dispatch.
But yeah, I mean,
he's wonderful in this movie.
He's so good.
I really wonder if it's like I did some research, like trying to figure out if, there's an article or whatever about like that he decided to retire from acting, or I couldn't find anything about that. I don't know why I haven't at least seen him in other kind of small budget indies, or like he's got a great like character actor face and vibe.
Yeah.
And I love him in this. He's very funny in this movie. I don't know why he's not in stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about Bob a little bit more as we go through, but just kind of general things. The movie was made after a 13-minute short film that Owen Wilson and Wes Anderson made in 1992. As we talked about, this wasn't released as a feature until February 21st, 1996. It's a tight 90 minutes. The budget, they did get a $5 million budget, eventually lauded. It was a box office failure, but it did do pretty well with some major critics. I know there's a really positive Los Angeles Times article that helped kind of propel it into being a cult classic. Yeah, it only made $560,000 at the box office, and I love this little detail. Owen Wilson did contemplate joining the Marines after the failure of this. I'm glad that he didn't, and he stuck with a film career. But I like it because there's this little bit. I think it's at least might just be one time, but in the movie, people ask Dignan if he's in the army because of his haircut. And which is, Owen Wilson's a good looking guy. This haircut is so unflattering. Oh, I don't mind it. That's so funny.
Oh, I think it like knocks like 3 points off his like whatever number you would give him on the 1 to 10 scale.
I guess it does.
Easily.
I think it's cool to see Owen Wilson with such short hair, because he did kind of rock the like long, not shoulder length, but like semi-surfer guy hair that like Luke really has style. It's not a good looking haircut, but yeah, there's a lot more in the making of and all that, but I do want to say there's a really fantastic 25-minute documentary that is very loosey-goosey. It's not super like tight or anything like that, but it has interviews with all the cast. It's on the Blu-ray DVD extras, or you can even watch it on YouTube. You can also watch the 13-minute short film if you like. That's a really, really kind of informative to see how much Owen and Wes grew as writers and as filmmakers from the short, which is really good and really fun. I know Walker watched it too. But I think there's more interesting data we could kind of call upon as we go through it. But those are kind of the basic things I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I think that it just like what really needs to be underlined here is that this launched the career of Wes Anderson. And like people, if they've seen any Wes Anderson movies, they have a very specific sense of like what a Wes Anderson movie is and looks like in terms of like the way people speak and most, I think, probably most prominently the look of his films, which is like, they're incredibly art directed. Everything kind of exists in this like dollhouse world, where it's like it's a period piece
still photography
for a period that didn't exactly ever exist.
Yeah.
Right. And this movie feels like a Wes Anderson movie, but it does not it is grounded in like it seems like everybody exists in the time they're the aesthetic of the characters in terms of their dress is very like Gen X-y thrift store slacker like type of
very
thing.
much so.
People are not the dialogue is, I do think, like is reminiscent of like the kind of style of humor that he does continue to have in his movies, but it's, I would say, by far the most naturalistic dialogue of any Wes Anderson movie.
It's more steeped in like the Kevin Smith, Coen Brothers, Clerks. Sorry, I already said that, but like Clerks, Richard Linklater, maybe a little bit of Coen influence. It's very naturalistic, as you said. It's not.
Yeah, people repeat themselves or misspeak.
Yes.
There's like almost constant kind of overlapping dialogue. Like it's even the movies that Owen Wilson wrote with him, Rushmore and Royal Tenenbaums, like, which I will just say now are and then this is becoming a little bit of a take that people have, but I do think the best Wes Anderson movies are the ones he wrote with Owen Wilson. Those ones, even a very heightened aesthetic like Royal Tenenbaums, I think the ones he wrote with Owen Wilson, the characters feel much more real and much more human. But even in Rushmore and Royal Tenenbaums, I do feel like the dialogue is really tight, and there's more of an aesthetic choice being made about the rhythm of. There's a very Wes Anderson-y rhythm in how people speak in every movie after this, and I don't mind that at all. But I do love that Bottle Rocket is its own little standalone thing where, like I said, it's a hangout movie in a lot of ways. It's just kind of like the way these characters that seem like they have known each other since high school or maybe since childhood, and then very much so in the case of your two leads, they obviously have known each other since childhood. They're brothers, even though they're not playing brothers. And just that natural chemistry is like, I love this. I love the way these people hate and love each other, and I'm down to just hang out in this movie and watch that happen. And I don't think any other Wes Anderson movies are quite like that.
No, and I think that's so well said. And I think that I was mentioning like the contemporary influences that, you know, this movie does feel like a little bit of a product of like the studio. In that short documentary that I was referring to, I think we have probably, especially right now with like strikes and things going on, we just don't have like a high opinion, generally speaking. I'm not speaking for everybody, about like producers and the studios and all that. It is really, really cool to see how supportive like major names in terms of producers, and then producers I'd never heard of, but I have a great admiration for, in pushing for Wes Anderson was a genius essentially, and this movie had to get made. You know, it's really, really cool to see. I think that it's also clear, though, that like Wes Anderson and Owen were a beneficiary of like the Kevin Smiths and the Richard Linklaters, and you know, like just that whole bubble of indie cinema that happened in the early '90s. But Wes was a contemporary of theirs. With like, if his film came out in 1992, his short film, even though there was the delay, but talking about their influences and the way the actors interact and talk over one another in such like a funny, and some of my favorite lines in this movie are when people are kind of cross conversation. Is very Robert Altman. And if you kind of like, not only Robert Altman, but if you look at like great cinema of the 1970s, like there's this like really, I was talking about Alien earlier. Alien is a perfect example, directed by Ridley Scott, but the dialogue is very Robert Altman in that like the characters over at the dinner table, or when they're trying to figure things out, even before the alien attacks Kane, there's a lot of cross conversation that establishes like who is in certain tier of science. The way like Veronica Cartwright's character talks to Tom Skerritt is more sciencey versus the way. So you establish class there. The Deer Hunter. That's not a Robert Altman film. That's I forget the name of the director.
I do too.
It'll come to me, but also directed Heaven's Gate. Like there's a lot of cross conversation. It's a lot about class too, right? And I think like in the Deer Hunter, they're back from the war, and it's sort of how do we function in the society. So I think that what's really cool about that is that you could see Owen and Wes's influence as the type of cinema they probably grew up on, and then sort of bringing it into this 90s sensibility is just really, because I do think Bottle Rocket has a little bit to say about like, even within the three friends, you briefly kind of gestured at this. I want to talk about it more later, like that they might be from different socioeconomic classes themselves, even though they're both like, white American men or whatever. I do think that that's gestured at. It's really, really cool to see. That's all.
I agree. And I mean, I do think that like the 90s is such a fun period for movie lovers because, like.
Not Radiohead fans though.
I know. I can't wait for this high schooler to see this movie and go like, oh, what a great new movie. And then when I could be like, oh, that's in my top 10 movies, she could be like, I didn't know adults knew about this movie, and I could feel the fool. No, I mean, it's so fun, this period where, big studios would buy these little indie movies and that it resulted in, I'm sure to like good and bad net effect, but it resulted in all these, voices getting pushed into the mainstream, and, and then you like Quentin Tarantino can have a heist movie that opens with people talking about a Madonna song. Like, I love that.
Oh, was that Reservoir Dogs?
Yeah. These things that like, 10 years before it would be like, what the hell is this? And then audiences really like it. They like to spend time hanging out with characters. But I think what makes Bottle Rocket such a special movie is where you have a movie like Clerks, where it's like a bunch of friends shooting the shit, essentially. Yeah, right?
That's like the hangout movie.
Right. But it's also like, and I think it's both established for like fans of Kevin Smith. But for me, it's like I'm kind of more a fan of the guy. I am a big fan of some of the movies, but it's more that like I'm kind of a fan of the guy and career, personally, speaking for myself. The point I'm getting at is I'm glad Clerks exists. I see its influence on like the film, and that a movie like that could be a modest hit, probably resulted in a bunch of other stuff that is some of my favorite stuff, but it's not like well composed, in my opinion, in terms of its like the way like shots are staged or anything. It's not like interesting to look at. Wes Anderson is incredibly meticulous behind the camera, and even though he doesn't have the budget or experience maybe at the time that Bottle Rocket gets made, to have it look like Royal Tenenbaums will look a few years later, where it's just like, oh my God, every single frame is so like gorgeous to look at and so meticulously composed. It does have that incredibly competent and just like it has his super strong aesthetic eye behind the camera. And so it's really nice to look at, even though it's a fairly low budget, $5 million movie, and there's not a ton visually going on. It is such a perfect combination of the hangout movie and the strong aesthetic eye of a director who will go on to have an aesthetic that you specifically think of as the Wes Anderson aesthetic. Did I say the word aesthetic enough times?
No, but I love what you're saying too. I mean, it's the second scene in the movie, but where Dignan and Anthony are sitting on the bus together. This is my favorite like moment of camera operation, at least that I've keyed in on. It starts on the driver of the bus, and you hear Dignan on the side go, "Driver, what's our ETA?" And
whip shot.
Whip shot. Thank you. Yeah. Whip shots to Dignan and Anthony. And I'm just like, that's like a really sophisticated way to set up the shot. And then there's one more, I'll just say my other favorite. There's one more shot in the robbery scene where it starts with, and this is something Wes Anderson's really good at in general, but in this movie, it's really impressive, of 3 characters walking and the camera is probably like on a dolly track or something like that, or maybe not. Maybe it's just handheld. And the characters are walking at normal speed.
He doesn't do a lot of handheld, but I think it kind of like shakes as it follows them to the entrance of the bookstore. I think
it does that. So like this is during the robbery at Hinckley Cold Storage, though. It starts with Kumar and Applejack, I think, in frame. And then they go onto one of those old style elevators that you like drop the gate on. They're probably actually pretty dangerous. And it goes from them like in the hallway, and then you realize, the camera's in the elevator as they're going up, and you see Dignan climb the stairs from like a bisected POV and then come back. And I'm like, that is really, really like that's not easy to set up and establish. And I feel like he maybe got away from that a little bit. I don't mean to like stray us so far, but I feel like he gets away from that a little bit, like even within Tenenbaums, where he's not focused so much on movement. It's more still frame photography. Mm-hmm. And so you don't get as much of an interesting, like frenetic. I mean, you do get it in Tenenbaums, like because there's still action in those, but I don't know. I'm not trying to make it about like how he declined. I think it's just where his interest maybe was. And I don't know if Bottle Rocket is a story that maybe required him to do whatever, but I just like, there's just little things like those 2 shots in particular where I'm like, oh, this is really cool how much we're moving. And anyways, that's all. Well, I love those 2 shots like so much.
Great observation about the elevator shot. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, to me, it's like, I don't want to make this about bashing on his later work or whatever, but it has become really hit or miss for me. And I feel like I have ridden with Wes Anderson more than not. Like, I mean, he's incredibly successfully as a like, so it's not like it's like, oh, my little guy, Wes Anderson or whatever. But I remember like The Life Aquatic is a movie where the aesthetic gets really, really amplified. And I know that is a point of departure for a lot of people where it's like, okay, the aesthetic has kind of just taken over. Yeah. I love that movie. I think it's very, very funny, warm, has heart, makes me laugh, makes me emotional. I still really love that movie. It also is like, now there's like animated creatures in the aesthetic, and there's all these little like kind of like toy model sets that he's really interested in shooting very slowly and stuff. I think it looks great. I think the movie's very funny and I love it. And then the Darjeeling Limited is another one that I notice if people were on board still for Life Aquatic, that's kind of the jump off point for a lot of people. I still really, really like that movie. The first one for me that I was like, this feels empty to me was Moonrise Kingdom. And I've liked stuff that's come out since, and I've really not liked stuff that has come out since. All that to say, I do think there is a point where, as a director, his interest in the sets and the clothing and the shot composition does, to me, seem to be at the sacrifice of like character development and these things that I am and jokes and these things that I'm a little more, it's gotten a little cute for me, I guess is what I'm saying. And in these first 3 movies, I do feel like the style of it all and how stylized it is, it's just another cool element of these very funny, heartfelt movies that really know their characters and really know what they kind of want to say about them. And that exists in Bottle Rocket, even though there aren't all these like little rinky dink sets and stuff like that. It's like the shot of the messy bedside table in the hotel room and Bob's hand reaching over to is like
so beautiful.
It's the most beautifully composed messy table you've ever seen. Yeah. And there's an anecdote I've heard about that where producer James L. Brooks saw the way everything was perfectly arranged in that, and there's a cup with like
cigarette butts
and like liquor in it, and it's so prominent in the shot. And apparently James L. Brooks watched the dailies and was like, there better be poison in that cup. Like basically be like, why the fuck are you spending so much time perfectly composing this shot of the cup? But it's awesome. And then like the Wes Anderson-y thing of like close-ups on cute little objects. I feel like the first time you see that in his work is Dignan's notebook and all the little jokes that are contained if you stop and read what is written in this notebook, and the way it kind of like it's like, again, it's like messy, and he has like messy handwriting and kind of looks like a like,
but his handwriting looks like
it.
a typed font, even though it's messy, because it's like still symmetrically messy. It reminds me very much of how in Movie Crush, when they talk about The Shining, how it's like even the way the twins are arranged as a murder scene, when Danny closes his eyes, it's like Kubrick messy.
Totally.
Right? It's like not how like a murder scene would actually look. And I feel like what's so great about the shot you're talking about of Bob grabbing the keys is it's like very human, because it's like he pauses, he hesitates. You only see his hand, but we know it's Bob because he's the one who owns the vehicle.
Bob's gone. He stole his car.
Yeah, there's something symmetrical though about like the cigarette butts, and like it's like it's not even party poppers, but whatever, maybe it is, like those.
I think it is.
Teeny,
yeah.
Like, yeah, those little teeny dots that come out of it. It's all just like perfectly arranged to look messy, and it doesn't take you out of the movie. It's just somebody that, and I think in that making of, what really stood out to me is the cinematographer talked about how Wes Anderson, he did understand like camera operation and like what a focus puller was, and I highlight that because there's a really great moment of Luke Wilson saying he and Owen didn't know what a focus puller was, so they didn't know where to stand in frame.
Yeah,
and but I think Wes did understand that. But I think where he was still relatively green is he had everything sort of like color coded, and and what the cinematographer talks about is he's like, I'd never really seen a director be that intent on color phasing. But what I think for me, I'm like, oh, that's like somebody that understands photography really well. And I think that his movies, as he's gotten more control and more understanding and everything, they look more like still photography setup, whereas I think Bottle Rocket feels more movement oriented. And I don't know if that was by necessity, if he had less control or what. Anyways, I didn't mean to just keep harping on the same point.
I do think it's probably, I mean, I think that is a good way of saying the point that I'm trying to make, which is like the monumental talent of Wes Anderson as a director, I think is very much on display, even though this is a incredibly lo-fi movie compared to even their second one. But I also think that it is one of those things of like seeing what somebody that talented with that strong and specific of a visual artistic sensibility, what they do within the limits of both budget and this being their first movie, and them just not having the experience to execute the fully realized visions that they would later. I think there's something more exciting about that in this case, in the case of his movies, than getting to see him do exactly whatever he wants. Now, some filmmakers, the more they get to do exactly whatever they want, the better and better their movies get, in my opinion. But he's just somebody who I think the limitations serve him a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Zach, I already feel like in terms of talking about like Wes Anderson and who made this and shot composition and stuff, we're already kind of slipping in some of our favorite parts. So should we just like talk about like how this movie came into our lives, and then we can just like free form talk about the movie and what we love about it?
Yeah, I'd love that.
I think we might have seen this movie at the same time. Do you want to talk about like how this movie came into our lives? I think in this case, like it's just we don't need to each say our background with it, because I think it's like the same point of origin for both of us, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we had this, I think so too. We had this family friend who went to our church by the name of, it's okay if I mention his name, right?
I think so. I mean, we're about to praise him for bringing Bottle Rocket into our lives.
Yeah, we had this young family friend. His name was Steve Bozzo, and this is what I think, and feel free to correct me along the way. I think he introduced it to our cousin Levi, who then introduced it to his mom, our Aunt Michelle.
That sounds right.
Yeah, and we had talked about that, like there was some our parents were pretty strict with movies, but like there were ones that just got in that then became like staples.
Yeah,
and
because this movie is rated R, but like
this
really
rated R.
only for swearing.
Only for swearing. Yeah, there's a very, very sweet love scene that has no nudity or anything in it like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, people are going to parent and show their kids movies as they please, but I really am grateful because I think because there was a little bit of a limitation on kind of what was let in, I think that what was let in really, really shaped like our sense of humor and engagement. And
we would latch on super hard,
especially
something that was like for adults.
Yeah, and I just am so grateful because Bottle Rocket. I want to let you chime in at any time, but where it really influenced me is Bottle Rocket.
Well,
I just
think the only thing that's like getting left out is just that our Aunt Michelle introduced this movie to us and like a bunch of our cousins and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we and I, Zach, have a very specific memory of us all being in Aunt Michelle and Uncle Tim's bedroom at their house, and like all sitting on their bed watching a VHS copy of this. Like a ton of people in that bedroom watching this movie for the first time.
No, I agree. I mean, I kind of have a memory of that too. I mean, it's just like, and then I just remember us having a VHS copy and just watching it a lot. And I do want to again cite my Aunt Michelle because she said something that I've never forgotten and I really latched onto. And it's the first film I can remember consciously thinking that film and movies are meant to have potentially more to say than what you see on the screen at first glance. And it's not that Bottle Rocket has some hidden message or something like that, but I remember her talking about the goals of each character. And I remember her saying, oh, it's so interesting. Each character gets what they want in it. And I think that what she was speaking to, I remember her saying is like, Anthony finds love and he just wants to be loved. Dignan gets to go to prison because, as Walker already said when he was summarizing the plot, like the crime goes belly up and he is more or less happy that he gets validation for his failed crime to go to prison.
And he's a criminal now.
Yeah, Bob Mapplethorpe gets a relationship with his brother, even though it's really not an actual relationship. But that's at the very end of the film. But I also think. Well, I don't know. I want to let you interject anything on that if you have.
No, I mean, I think it's true. Like, I think like for like a movie that is so like loosey goosey in terms of like vibe and story, like I do think it like follows a pretty traditional structure of like just, you know, the characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the characters start out one way and they end up another way.
Exactly.
And in this case, it is even though the movie. And we'll talk about the end and the final shot and stuff because it ends in an extremely melancholic way. And for me, like it always like I adore the ending of this movie so much.
It's incredible.
But it feels like this like pretty like funny movie ends in kind of a sad way, but it is a non-traditional happy ending because Dignan, all he wants through the whole movie is to be cool, and his definition of cool is being like Mr. Henry, which is like his dream is to be a petty criminal, and he does accomplish that dream.
Yeah, so I mean, it was definitely somebody else's analysis that I'm even quoting now that I said like kind of more or less taught me. I don't know if that's true. You know, we have a way of like applying this like linear hindsight, like this was the moment. You know, I'm not pretending that I'm not doing that a little bit, but there are. You know, I could talk about it an hour later. There are a couple shots in the film where I'm like, I wonder if that's intentional, like visual, like metaphor or something like that. And but you know, the other reason why I love Bottle Rocket so much is you've already spoken to it. The chemistry between the Wilson brothers is so familiar and yet unmatched. I would say, I don't have this in my notes, but where I do think it's matched and where it reminds me of a little bit is something like Good Will Hunting, which came out the next year. You know, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, famously not brothers, but behave like brothers and have had this really long and fruitful collaboration, are excellent writers. Kevin Smith, again, had a hand, not in that movie, but in sort of bringing that movie up.
He produced it.
Yeah, he produced it. I believe he got it to Harvey Weinstein. And but like Kevin Smith actually has a quote about the end of Good Will Hunting where he talks about, I just remember him saying so specifically, Affleck gives the performance of his lifetime when Chucky goes to Will's house and he looks in and sees that he's gone and there's been all this foreshadowing. I think similarly, Owen Wilson gives the performance of a lifetime in that last shot that you were just speaking about. I mean, it's definitely, and this goes to Wes Anderson too, he slows it down and it's very melancholy, but that look he gives back to Bob and Anthony as he's going back in the prison gang is so incredible. And it's just like, I don't even know what he's saying on his face necessarily, but I think Owen Wilson is a fantastic actor and a fantastic comedian, but like, isn't it so interesting in something like a Good Will Hunting or like Bottle Rocket that somebody could just start at such a high level? I don't know.
I mean, I can't believe we're talking about the ending first, but I mean, like, listeners, watch the movie, and like, hopefully you have if you're listening to this. But
that was a little bit of a weird place to jump around.
No, but I think that is why the ending is so like touching and emotional, because like the dynamic between Owen Wilson's character Dignan and these other two is he really is like, he is kind of like emotionally blackmailing them into like doing crime with him through the whole movie. Like that is, you know what I mean? Like it is like, it's always kind of like, come on, man. Like literally, it like is a thing he says a lot, is it's just like, I need you guys to do this. And like, you know, and he's like acting like it's for all of them, but it's really them being overly supportive and kind of not having enough of their own identities and own stuff going on, that they keep getting like wrapped up into his harebrained schemes. And the ending bit of the movie is Anthony and Bob are visiting him in prison. And as he's going, like Zach said, he's in line with all the other inmates. There's a fence between them, and he's going back into the jail. And they're saying their goodbyes. And then Dignan starts saying, like, did you bring the stuff? It's like for the escape plan, did you bring the grappling hook? And he starts going through all these instructions, going like, okay, you're going to climb up here. And Bob, shield me from the bullets. And like, and all this. And they're freaking out and acting as if against their better judgment. They're acting as if they're going to start doing, they're all freaked out because they feel like they have to do this prison break with him that they didn't know he had been planning on. And then he like laughs at it. He was joking, and he gets them.
So wait, can we talk about that? What do you think that scene is saying? Do you think Dignan is exercising a little bit of like showing his power and influence, or do you think he's showing them that he finally gets it? Or what?
I think he's showing them that it's like, it's okay, you guys can live your lives. I'm okay now.
Oh man, I want to cry.
Because he laughs, and then the final line of the movie is. I guess just like, hey, don't worry about it. I think that's like, I think it's like acknowledgement that they've like been good friends to him, and that now, and that he's okay, and they don't like have to take care of him anymore.
And what is the line after that, Walker? You were about to say.
Well, he said the final line of the movie is to Anthony. He goes, "Ain't it funny how you used to be in the nut house and now I'm in jail?" Because the opening scene of the movie is Dignan, quote unquote, breaking Anthony out of a voluntary hospital where he's, and then it goes into the slow motion shot. Wes Anderson ends a lot of his movies with a slow-mo shot.
And it has an original score. I forget the name
original
of the
score
person.
by Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo.
It's so good.
And then, it's like it ends with this very like sad slow motion shot of Dignan and a bunch of people going into the jail
on a chain gang.
Yeah. And but he turns around and looks back at them, and it's to camera, but he's looking at Bob and Anthony, and that's what I think that's what I think is being communicated in the moment.
And in that shot that Walker just described, that's the moment where I think is like the performance of Owen's life. It's
really serious.
It's so serious. It's so good. And I mean, a lot of that goes to Wes Anderson. It's like, because I think when a movie is this small, you really can just praise the actor and the director singularly, because he does just give this look that's very serious. And I think is the most serious, earnest look we've seen from Dignan yet in the film. It's very earnest. And that line too of, isn't it crazy how you used to be in the nut house and now I'm in jail? That is like Kurt Vonnegut level, like irony, like satire. It's just funny on its own, but then you're like, well, what does it mean? And you don't quite know what it means, or at least I don't. It's so
funny
brilliant.
too, because Zach, I'm just thinking of this in the moment, but it's like both things are like kind of voluntary. Like I know it isn't like technically voluntary that he's in jail, but it's like, again, so like I like that we're talking about the ending is getting us to talking about the beginning, but the opening bit of this movie, and it's a very kind of like gag, like it's like the most like kind of overt gag in the movie, I think, is this sequence of Dignan breaking Anthony, again, big air quotes, breaking Anthony out of the voluntary hospital. It's like, it's very funny, but it's like a little more overtly goofy than I think a lot of the other jokes in the movie are. But so it's like, Anthony, it's revealed, again, just like suburban ennui, bored, kind of sad, small life. He is checked into this hospital for, quote, exhaustion. And we'll maybe talk about that exchange where that's revealed later. And Dignan's breaking it out. And Dignan goes to jail by being in a place where he didn't have to be, doing a crime he didn't have to do, and has the opportunity to flee the crime scene before the police get there, and chooses not to, chooses to kind of like,
but who was
in this
take
very
the fall for
martyry
him,
way. Yeah,
Anthony was going to take the fall for him. Which
right, but
this,
it's also,
yeah.
but it's totally Dignan's ego trip, because
Oh,
Anthony
totally.
is, because like he literally, you know, give me this one.
Right.
Who is in charge here? You know, and
You
so,
are, you dumb son of a bitch. Now, will you please leave?
That's the only point I wanted to make, is I just never caught until this conversation the kind of the beauty of that line. Ain't it funny that you used to be in the nut house and now I'm in jail? And both things are things that were like either volunteered for or incredibly avoidable, is also funny and sweet.
Well, what we're talking about, I mean, this is the last thing that I have like kind of bulleted out my notes, and then I really just want to go through as we're doing, just free form, whether it's the ending, middle, or beginning. But I, in a way, and I did this for another film that we talked about that I think asked you to do this. I think this movie asks you to sort of fill in the backstory and the relationship of these characters, just like I think King of Comedy does. And I think in doing so, you can totally run away and create a narrative. But I don't think that Bottle Rocket has necessarily the same amount to say about class as King of Comedy or something like Taxi Driver does, even though it's about a white character and it's made by a white filmmaker. I think it does a little bit ask you to do this. So I have created just a really quick backstory about Dignan and Anthony's relationship, if I could just kind of read that to you really quick.
Yes, please.
So I think Dignan and Anthony have a codependent relationship that goes both ways in terms of its toxicity. So you were talking about Dignan kind of blackmailing Anthony a little bit. I think Anthony also has what we would call like a savior complex a little bit. And it's impossible to trace something like that in a relationship this intimate to one event, but I've tried to do that. So I think it's a codependent relationship that has an intimate and caring foundation. Just because something's codependent does not always mean it's toxic. Right. And if you take a step back and you use a little bit of information that's actually given to us, you learn a few key things about Dignan and Anthony. So the first thing is, and this is me hypothesizing, I think Dignan comes from more or less poverty and a single parent mother, because there's a very key scene. It's the second or third scene in the movie where they rob.
It's their first
Anthony's
practice job.
Yes, they rob Anthony's parents, and I don't know if Anthony. I think Anthony likely comes from a more stable home because there's stuff to rob. With a more middle class background, it's unclear if his younger sister Grace is a half sister from the same marriage or from a new marriage, given their age difference. But whatever.
But she's also in a private school. He's visiting her.
She's in a private school, exactly. And Dignan has a line too, because he takes something that he wasn't supposed to take from Anthony's parents. And Anthony says, "Why don't we rob your parents? Or do you ever think of that?" And Dignan hangs his head in sadness, and he goes, "There's nothing to steal from my mom and Craig." So I think what that is signaling is that Dignan was raised by, I'm not saying something like tragic, like she was a streetwalker or whatever, but I do think a single mother specifically. And now she's with Craig, right? And there's also,
and can I just interject too? I think this is a role Owen Wilson really likes to write for himself, where he is somebody kind of grafting himself into somebody else's family or community, because that's the same thing his character is doing in Tenenbaums.
Yeah.
And kind of he didn't write it, but it's kind of what is happening with his character in Life Aquatic too.
Yeah. No, totally.
So that's just he likes to be like, I'm this like kind of like fuck up loner out here, and I'm inserting myself into somebody else's more stable environment.
Yes, 100%. I mean, big time in Tenenbaums. And I think Anthony has likely been to college and was afforded the luxury to stay at an expensive mental health clinic, because that place is nice. And there's another incidental
and
scene
voluntary, as he says,
where Stacey Sinclair, Elizabeth's sorority sister, that's how she knows him. So I think Anthony went to college and dropped out, but went to a nice college.
And now he's just bumming around.
Exactly. And I think that Anthony is the embodiment of the popular nice guy, which we don't often see in film. But he's proof that in order to be popular in high school, especially in that era, one doesn't need to be a jock douchebag. He probably like, I think that he actively rejected the jock douchebag archetype and kept Dignan around closer, like throughout high school, to show that one doesn't need to be a jerk to be popular. And I've met people like this that are like nice, popular guys. And it's not really a fun person to portray on film, because we had the 80s before that where every single jock was a jerk. And then this is the last little fantasy part I have, is what was the event that tied Dignan and Anthony together? And I think this is just speculative, but I think their moms could have been friends. Maybe they were friends with each other, but I like to imagine that Dignan stood up for or saved Anthony at a very young age. Like similar to something like George Bailey saving his younger brother in the beginning of It's a Wonderful Life, but with none of the charisma or heroics. So like, for example, I imagine like Dignan and Anthony, I imagine Dignan standing up to like their first school bully and getting his ass totally beat, but doing it on behalf of Anthony. And Anthony forever having that, like, I can't abandon Dignan because Dignan has done this thing for me. But I don't think the movie asks you to do this, because on the surface, Dignan, Anthony, and Bob are all misfits that are like beaten down by the system or their malaise in life. But it is true that Bob is beaten down by his older preppy brother, Future Man. But Bob has a lot more going on for him than Dignan and Anthony does. And the difference between Dignan and Anthony is that Anthony can pull out of his station at any time he needs to. Yeah. He's incredibly handsome. He's socially aware. He's genuinely smart. He can be realistic when he focuses. He makes friends easily. He makes friends with Mr. Henry incredibly easily. And while I don't think that he'll ever stop loving Dignan, I do think that he'll quickly rise above him and have a nice career and a family. And that's kind of my backstory and hypothesis of what could have tied them together.
I mean, I love all of it. I think you like understand these characters really intrinsically well. I definitely do see Anthony as like the nice, popular guy. I was gonna say
was on the football team, smoked weed once.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Is I think he's kind of like because you know who else is like that kind of protagonist? His name has been said a few times, but the protagonist of Richard Linklater's Dazed and Confused. Mm-hmm. Is the nice popular guy who's on the football team, but you know, super hot, easily likable guy, but he would rather kind of like, he wants to hang out with the people who are into like the music he digs and smoke
freaks
weed
and geeks a little bit, like Lindsay maybe.
Totally. And like I think that I like the backstory of Dignan having stepped up for Anthony in some way. I could easily see that, because their relationship dynamic is so funny, because it's like, it's a relationship dynamic where Anthony is actually in way more control, but lets Dignan think he's the alpha at all times. Because the whole thing is Owen Wilson like bossing everybody around, but he actually has no authority whatsoever.
Come on, Dignan. Because Anthony gets exasperated with him and he has to let the facade down at a certain point and at a couple moments.
Yeah. Sorry. Like when he won't leave him and Inez alone and he has to go, Dignan? And like signal, like, get the fuck out of here.
You see who the alpha is. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think for me, the way I kind of always filled it in is it's just like, Anthony's a guy who easily moves from social group to social group and would maybe just rather hang out. It's like easier to kind of hang out. This isn't a drug movie or a pot movie, but I had the kind of same thing. It's like, maybe these are the guys who we like smoked pot with in high school. And as the people from maybe the upper part of his social strata, the high achievers or people with, you know, a lot of like financial privilege going for them or whatever, as they go on and graduate college and buy houses and have babies and get good jobs or whatever, he just kind of got stuck hanging out with these guys. And he doesn't even necessarily, I don't even get the impression that he necessarily like resents it, but he's not,
he knows he's a little bit better than it.
I think so. Yeah, I think
Better's
so.
the wrong word. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think you see him, the whole movie is him going against his better judgment to try to make his friend Dignan happy. So I think that's where the savior complex thing comes in too, because it's like, that isn't really doing like a service to your friend, right? To keep going along with shit you don't want to do because they seem like they really need you to, and you kind of resent them for it.
Which is like the hardest lesson in life to learn, is like, if I keep giving myself to this person, they're never going to learn anything. It's so easy to give that advice to other people, and it's so hard to see when you're doing it yourself.
Totally. Well, Zach, okay, this actually very organically gets me into something I wanted to point out about this movie that I just really love as I get older. And I'm sure we've talked about this in other movie episodes, but the best movies to me are the ones that age with you. Yeah. And that you're able to like experience from different points of view as you get older. And sometimes you watch something and it's like, oh my God, this was so exciting to me when I was Fight Club is a great example. And I recently just rewatched Fight Club, and I got to say it held up as incredibly entertaining more than I did. But the part of me that deeply connected with Fight Club is I do watch it and laugh at it now and go, I can't believe I thought this was so deep and so profound. Yeah. And blah, 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 blah. It's a fun movie or whatever, but it's like I'm not aging with it. It's a very young man's movie. And this is a movie that as I get older, I feel like I can see this movie from the part of me that was a teenager and was like, oh wow, like Luke Wilson's really cool or whatever. And I could see it from an adult and go, oh yeah, you could go through these long periods of life where you're just fucking stuck, and see it kind of from that vantage point too. And from being a little removed of that vantage point. All that to say, this movie came out in 1996. Let me lay on you some other movies that came out in 1996. So we've got Hard Eight, the first feature film of P.T. Anderson. Right? Oh, P.T. Anderson. Sorry.
Great movie. I've only seen it once.
It's really great. And like, I mean, kind of like this or like Mean Streets, it's very much like a kind of
demo.
Yeah, exactly. Of like, it's like a lo-fi version of what they'll do. But Hard Eight's awesome. Yeah, Scream.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Waiting for Guffman.
Oh, I thought that was 94. Okay.
No, that's 1996. I'm listing these ones. There was obviously like every year a ton of, but these are either huge actual favorite movies of mine, or, you know, in the case of Hard Eight, a very impactful early movie. I didn't see Hard Eight until after I'd seen everything else that had come out. But
Waiting for Guffman was part and parcel for us growing up on.
Waiting for Guffman is a huge movie for us. Scream like revitalizes the slasher genre. And then another movie that is in my top 10 is Trainspotting. And that also came out in 1996. Now I say all that to say Trainspotting and this on their face, like pretty different movies. And Trainspotting is most thought of as a drug movie and specifically as a heroin movie. But it is also a hangout movie. And I honestly, watching Bottle Rocket this time, I didn't know that they came out the same year till afterwards, but I was thinking about Trainspotting a lot because I just recently rewatched it. And I was like, this kind of feels like the American Trainspotting to me, or Trainspotting feels like the European Bottle Rocket to me, in that I think that at its core, they're just both movies about that kind of ask this question of like, do you actually choose your friends? And they address how hard it is to change, like how hard it is to change without kind of like abandoning your roots and surroundings.
Yeah.
Like the idea of, like you said, like Anthony like knows that he shouldn't be like, kind of like to put it really harshly, it's like there is a sense of like I shouldn't be mixed up with these losers in this bullshit. But how do you actually, and he doesn't really kind of start to better himself until the midpoint of the movie where he and Dignan break up. And there's like a montage of all the stuff he's doing that is like more in line with probably
how he still invokes Dignan though. In his letter to Grace.
Sure.
When the part Walker's talking about where he's writing a letter to his younger sister Grace, who chastised him for hanging out with Dignan earlier, because he's got some associates. Is one of them Dignan? Yeah, one of them's Dignan. So she kind of gives him shit for it. And it's a very quick scene. It's a very funny scene. But then the part Walker's talking about where he's writing this retrospective letter to his younger sister Grace, he talks about how he's doing a paper route, working construction, and coaching a little league soccer team called the Hurricanes. They got a lot of heart and a lot of spirit. They remind me of Dignan in that way. They don't let defeat get them down. So he still is always ready to invoke Dignan, which I think just goes back to that fantasy childhood scene I was talking about of Dignan doing something for Anthony, because he clearly loves Dignan. Like, he loves him.
Of course.
Anyways,
Of course
I
he
kinda
does. I mean,
interrupted you.
I think, no, not at all. No, I don't want a monologue here. But I think that you're getting it, like, what gives this movie kind of a melancholy. And Trainspotting is another movie that I think is very, very funny. It's like, it's
even some of the darkest moments are funny.
Even some of the darkest moments, but it is very similar to this movie. It's characters that have all known each other since they were very, very young and love and fucking hate each other. And if you enjoy the way they interact with each other, you're going to enjoy the movie. And it's also about the protagonist, Renton, trying to fucking get the fuck out of his surroundings and do something better. And I think in the case of Bottle Rocket, Anthony is in the relationship with Inez and seems to have found some real happiness. But I do think that him growing and being able to do that and being able to like better himself is kind of conditional on him and Dignan being forced apart. And in Trainspotting, spoilers for the end of Trainspotting, he does a drug deal with his friends. It's like this big victorious moment where they've all each made $4,000 from this drug deal. And it's like, the movie always makes me really sad in the end, but in a way that I love. But I always leave it with this like kind of big like knot in my chest, where it's like it goes from this moment of everybody being like, oh my God, look at us, we did it, like the boys, it's this it's this big victory lap where they're all having a pint. And then his violent psychopathic friend Bagby immediately starts a crazy brawl in the bar and like really brutally hurt somebody. And it's this moment of just like, it's always just going to fucking be this way. I'm always going to be getting into the same shit with these fucking idiots. And he robs his friends, steals their share of the money. And the end of the movie is him walking off with a voiceover monologue about how he's going to like change his whole life. Right. And I don't know. They just feel really, really similar to me. I don't know if that's even an interesting point, but I just happened to have just rewatched it. And I was like, I mean, I don't know. It's just two movies. It's only two examples, but I wonder if it's kind of a Gen X mentality and thing of just like, I guess, is this all there is a pretty existential question that's been asked in art for all time. But it's really interesting to me
a lot, though.
Yeah, like they do kind of call Gen X the like lost generation. I think it's the millennials are the first generation that like, on large are not doing as well as their parents. But Gen X, there is like a
warming you up for that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe you can take it from there if you even have anything to say about it. I'm now posing a question that I don't really have an answer to, but I did just find there to be such a shared point of view between these two movies that even the two movies, like, again, Trainspotting, people think of it as a drug film, but it actually is a film about old friends trying to get out of their shitty circumstances through like petty schemes and crimes and fucking each other over. And I think Bottle Rocket is, is about exactly the same thing. And I just am wondering why two movies the same year made in different countries that both have gone on to kick off huge careers for those directors and the casts, why they seem to be asking such similar questions about how do you get away from your shitty friends and your shitty circumstances?
Well, I think it's a great observation. I mean, I'd only seen Trainspotting one time, to my knowledge, before this. I recently watched it all the way through in prep because you were.
Oh, you didn't tell me.
Yeah, well, that was the only off-pod discussion we did, as Walker kind of hinted at that. This reminded him of it.
Just real quick, anyway. I want you to make your point, and be totally honest, and we won't debate it. But what do you think of the movie? Because I've been telling you,
I think it's great.
How much I love it.
I think it's great. I think it is one of it does this really amazing thing that I don't even know if Danny Boyle did again in his career, of like I mean, there's some really heavy stuff in it, both like just thematically and then what you actually see playing out. Obviously, the most being like the baby scene. I mean, I wouldn't say that they managed to make that funny, but it is sort of fits into a larger whole of just like how small your world can become, I think, when you are wrapped up in that stuff.
Right.
And I don't think heroin addiction is funny at all, but like I do think that there's a way to talk about it in a way that isn't like masturbatory, kind of like Requiem for a Dream is or something like that, right?
Yeah. And some of the stuff they do in pursuit and service of their heroin addiction is really funny. Some of the really fucked up stuff they do in service of that addiction is really funny.
Totally. I think that, and I think the way the points of departure of the various people at the end is different, but it reminds me a lot of it. I was even thinking about like, we were talking about, I think Ewan McGregor is more traditionally handsome than Owen Wilson, who I do think is also really handsome. But like they both have like not even shitty haircuts. Ewan McGregor has like a bit, not a bit, but like a very tight buzz cut in it.
Mm-hmm.
But has a great head of hair in like every other movie since then. And kind of, I don't know, that's not like an aesthetic choice or whatever. But I think that's a really, really well made point. I have a little thing about what you said much earlier, though, where you said it's kind of a movie to grow up with, unlike Fight Club, maybe. I really, and I don't know that this was the first time, but like since I was thinking about it sort of in terms of like relationship dynamics and like how, in today's vernacular and parlance, we'll use things like codependent or hero savior complex. I use that about not that exact, but like about myself. It's like understanding our psychology and why we may make moves that feel really good in the moment, but are kind of detrimental to our own long-term growth or our partners or our friends or whatever is a good thing. And I think it's really cool that we live in a society with that vernacular. Like I said, I was really connecting to Dignan, played by Owen Wilson, sort of the unfairness of how much Anthony, like I think we've had friends like this. There's a couple key moments where it's like Anthony is maybe more of the alpha than he lets on, and he kind of lets Dignan think he is. But I feel like Anthony is a little bit annoying in moments too, like when their relationship is completely falling apart. It is vindictive and annoying that he gives all of their money to Inez. Yeah. It's a sweet thing, but it only benefits Anthony and it actively harms Dignan.
Yeah. It's really selfish.
It's really, really selfish. Even
and as Dignan says, inappropriate.
Yeah, and then
that's
that
the
scene,
funniest line in that scene, though. You don't give a $500 tip to the housekeeper. That's inappropriate. That's inexcusable.
Right, and Anthony gets visibly upset and starts walking towards him as if he's going to like push him if Dignan says one more wrong thing, and you see that Dignan kind of gets a little bit scared. But then,
do you think they've ever fist fought before? My answer would be yes.
Yeah, I think but I don't think since they were been like 12 or 13. I think it's been a long time.
But it reminds me of like me and like my, like we talk about like I recently had dinner with my like oldest childhood friend, and we both ended up, and it was really, we were laughing about it, but we both ended up apologizing to each other for stuff we did when we were like 13, where it's like, I would not talk the way I talk to you to like my worst enemy. There's something about people you just know your whole life that it's like you will say and do wild shit to them.
Absolutely. And but in that scene though, I'm sure if listeners are this deep with us, they've seen the movie or whatever. But in that scene, there was a moment I never thought of as really annoying of Anthony. And I don't know that I've had friends like this, but where it's like, you get really steeped in their emotional journey and you don't realize how selfish it is of them to like kind of put that much on you. I'm sure I've done this before to people too. I just want to say, but Anthony goes and he grabs their bags and he says it's over. The fact that he gave all their money to the housekeeper, I think it was really selfish, even though he's sort of making it the selfless thing. And Dignan says, and this is where I was like, oh, I'm seeing the movie way more from Dignan's perspective this time and how unfair this is. He's like, do you ever think about how, Anthony says, I'm sorry. He says, I don't think you really know what I was going through back there. And Dignan goes, please don't lay this on me now. And I'm like, oh, Anthony is like elevating his own emotional journey above others a lot. And then how Dignan says, do you ever think about, I mean, it's a funny summation of it and it's a little bit ignorant.
What a smart observation, dude.
Yeah. And how he says, he's like, do you ever think that I would enjoy like running out, at the nut house, getting a tan? And I'm like, oh, he's envious. This is where I think Anthony's family has more money. And Dignan can't afford to take these like excursions for his mental health healing.
Not only that, but also what you're talking about too, like how easy like friends and also like women probably are for Anthony too, and like Dignan is probably like just
no
like
trouble.
Right. I really get the impression in Dignan's dynamic with Inez too, who Anthony's in love. Like this is his friend who he has sat on the sidelines and watch him make friends and get laid for their like entire journey together.
There's one other scene too earlier in the movie when they're at Bob's house. It's a very funny scene, and Stacey Sinclair, Elizabeth's sorority sister, a character we never see before or after, she's flirting with Anthony so hard, and you see the joy on Dignan's face, and Dignan is not even in her purview. And Dignan is not.
And Anthony
gross.
also like seems to not at all care or register.
That's part of his shtick, though. That's
totally
something that she loves. And so I really saw
he's
the movie.
cute and aloof. That's all you had to be in the 90s.
Yeah, and I mean, and Luke Wilson is stunningly hot in this movie. He's so good looking. Like anytime it pushes in on his face, it's just like this jaw, and like he's very uniquely good looking. They both Wilson.
I was really taken with how I mean, and he's still a good looking guy. He's aged into his looks well, but I was just like, wow, Luke Wilson is hot. Why wasn't he like a huge star?
Well, I don't know.
Just rhetorically,
I'm
just like, this guy is so good looking. And clearly Wes Anderson and Owen Wilson knew that, because they know to like Owen Wilson, not only is he smart enough to write this movie, he's smart enough to put his super hot brother at the center of it.
Totally. I mean, I want to talk about that in just like 2 seconds. There's another scene though, when their relationship is falling apart, when Dignan has a good idea. And he says, the only thing I want to do is get the fuck out of this town. And Anthony wants to stay there to develop his relationship with Inez. It's totally impractical. And Dignan has a good idea. He says, we could steal a car. I've been thinking about this. Inez has it's not a very advanced idea, but Anthony won't let him do it. I think for good reason. It'd be totally unethical. It could cost Inez her job. But then Dignan says, well, then we're going to have to hotwire a car. And hotwiring a car is such a movie trope. But I love the way Wes Anderson does it, because you see Dignan poorly looking around to like steal a car, but then he finds a convertible, and the very next scene is them away in the convertible. And I'm like, oh, Dignan has skill. Yeah. And I don't know. I really, really, really saw it from his perspective, in that it's not helpful to people if you're like making them feel better, which Anthony does again by joining the robbery. I want to take a breath, but the last thing I want to say is, how fucking awesome is it of Owen and Luke to put, as you said, his younger brother, who he recognizes as really good looking, to give him a job. Luke had no acting experience, and to put himself in sort of this lower role. Mm-hmm. I just think Owen is a brilliant actor and writer. I mean, that is not an easy thing to do, to set yourself in sort of a beta role like that and elevate. Yeah,
but he wrote himself an amazing. I mean, and this doesn't take away from what you're saying, but he wrote himself an amazing character, and like Dignan is the funniest person in the movie and gets to do the funniest stuff. And I love every performance and character in this movie. But I mean, that's interesting, Zach, that you're saying you see it. I'm sorry, am I interrupting you?
Well, I really want to hear. Last little thing. I think part of it comes from, though, is I do think there's an alpha probably dynamic. I always thought Luke was the older brother because of the way Owen said himself. But the eldest Wilson brother is in this movie, and he plays the arrogant douchebag so well. And even in the small doc,
he's like, he
kind of talks about his younger brothers.
Bully.
Yeah, he kind of talks about his younger brothers, like this little idea they had. And you could tell he is supremely confident in who he is. And I wonder if Owen and Luke were kind of nerds growing up. Yes. Like, I wonder if Owen and Luke were like nerds, and it erased that sort of like hierarchy a little bit.
Sure, I could see that. I could see that. And it is funny to write your oldest brother to be like, hey, we wrote you a part, and it's like this like truly sadistic, like evil bully. To the point that, Zach, in my notes, in the scene where Future Man is dominated by Mr. Henry in front of everyone, which is like possibly the sweetest scene in the movie in terms of like all the losers at this table like getting to be cool for a second.
Yes.
But there was a thing that
bunch of misfits.
Bunch of misfits, and then Mr. Henry, and the fact that Mr. Henry is the cool guy out of this group is also amazing. And I have more to say about this. It's every scene makes me want to say 500 things, but I will just say the moment of the waiter at the country club that they're all sitting at.
Jackson.
Bob is rich.
Yeah.
His family's rich, and so he's eating at a country club with Dignan and Anthony and the gang, Mr. Henry, the whole gang. And he clearly has I think it's like not to make like everything about race and class or whatever, but I don't think it's a coincidence that the waiter at the country club is a black man, and he has to interact. Yeah, and he has to interact with the patrons of the country club in a certain way, and so Bob is this little rich kid or whatever, but he clearly has like a nice small talk relationship with this waiter where they're on a first date basis with each other. They're kind of going back and forth or whatever. And I say all that to set up when Bob's older brother, Future Man, walks in, Jackson, his eyes go wide and he looks at Bob and he goes, "Oh, I'm going to go," and takes off. And it is and we've already seen we've already seen Future Man like physically and verbally abuse his brother. But it's like, oh, this is the fact that there's like two children of this very wealthy, privileged white family, and there's one that the like older African-American server at this country club can interact with in a really like positive and like, like pretty like
first name casual basis. Yeah.
Yeah. Casual. That is the word I was searching for, in like a casual way. And one that walks in and he jets. They're like really telling you like, Future Man is like an evil guy. Like,
even the way he introduces himself to everyone at the table with the handshake is very dominant. And Future Man, played by Andrew Wilson, the Wilson brothers, Owen and Luke, are about 6 foot tall. Andrew's like 6'3". He's just bigger and more imposing than his brothers.
And there is something
so well.
And I'm agreed with you that like I'm sure Andrew Wilson is not Future Man, right? I'm not putting that on him that he's but
he probably was in high school though.
It's very funny to write a movie, give your older brother a role, and the role you have written for him is a truly monstrous, sadistic bully. It's really funny. Who then gets humiliated for his behavior.
Yeah, and he just beats up on Dignan specifically so well, and I think that is where you really see Anthony come in. Like, can we talk about?
That's literally the moment Anthony decides to do the robbery against his better judgment. Is and that scene, Zach? That's when I saw them back in high school.
Me too.
Dignan gets beat up, not physically, but he gets verbally humiliated by Future Man.
Looks like
in
a
front
rodeo
of Anthony.
clown.
Yeah. What's that you got on? What's the name of the little his delivery that he can't stop laughing when he's making fun of
the Long Wranglers?
The Long Wranglers, and they can't stop laughing. Keep up the mowing, Kemosabe.
And they're in their awesome vintage Bronco, and Anthony tries to help Dignan. What, you see what he was wearing? Come on.
Yeah. It was pretty cool. I also love too when Dignan is going to, I'm not always as confident as I look.
So what does Anthony decide to do as a result of that, though?
That's when Anthony, it's like after the point they've broken up and they're on good terms again, but Anthony's like kind of, this whole movie is like the growth. What I love about this movie is it's very true to life. And I think that the way people grow and change is very like small to like the naked eye, but Anthony is like on a different path. He's like slowly on a path of self-improvement after getting out of the gang, as they refer to themselves multiple times. And Dignan keeps wanting him to do this big job, rob the cold storage. And he's sticking to like, no, I'm not going to do it. Even he's being peer pressured to do this job. Dignan's guilt tripping him about it. Exactly. Yeah, we can hang out, but no, I'm not going to do a robbery with you. And then after, it's in that moment where, again, emotional blackmail, that scene starts with Dignan saying, "I'm holding your position open for you." Anthony's like, yeah, I wish you wouldn't do that. And then he gets verbally undressed by these two bully characters. And Anthony literally goes to himself, "God damn it," and says, "I'm in." And then at the end of the scene, Dignan goes, you're doing the right thing, Anthony. And you hear him go, yeah, I know.
Yeah, I know I am.
But he's like bummed. Like
right. Well, that scene starts off so hilarious too. Dignan is on like a little like 50, like a really tiny motorcycle. And it's so funny. You see the kid dynamic that Dignan wants to like go back to being kids again. Yeah. When he's like, come on, jump on. He goes, it's too small for both of us, Dignan. We won't fit. Yeah, come on. And it's just like, I wonder, there's that scene where I'm like, is this like a little bit of a visual or like even verbal metaphor for their relationship where it's like Dignan wants Anthony to like come on like his tiny rocket that's like too small for the both of them. And there's another scene where, I don't know if I'm making my point correctly, but like there's another scene too where they're in the shit town before their relationship has fallen apart the first time in this middle of nowhere Texas town where Bob stole his own car. He like left the gang and he was their only means of transportation. And Dignan is depressed, like in like a field lighting off various fireworks. And he lights a sparkler and he hands it to Inez, who's now Anthony's girlfriend. And I'm like, is the visual metaphor something like he's passing the baton, the torch, if you will, of who is sort of Anthony's focus of who to take care of?
Oh, I like that.
I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it's a really sweet, sad moment because Anthony comes up with Inez. He's like, why don't you just come with us to this little bar, which you could see as a pattern that's been going on a lot. Come on, hang out with us. It'll be okay. No, you won't. We won't get beat up, but then Dignan gets beat up. I don't know. It's just like I think there's like some really sweet foreshadowing at that point of like sort of like handing over Anthony's central focus of who to take care of.
I love that. You and your visual metaphors, man. It's great. I love
that scene so much.
I want to talk about, you were talking about the alpha dynamic between the two off screen, the two brothers, on screen, the two friends. But like we said, they're friends who are close enough to be brothers.
Absolutely,
so it's perfectly cast. I was thinking about the title of this movie, and I got to be honest, I don't think I ever really had given a great deal of thought to the title. There's a montage when they're on the lam after robbing the bookstore again, more voluntary hardship of.
You get the sense they drove like 100 miles too. It's like not very far.
It's funny. One of my early notes is, do they ever leave Texas? And then it was confirmed for me moments later that they do not leave Texas, because when Dignan is beat up on the bed in the hotel room, that he's eating from a bag that says Texas burger. So they don't even leave the fucking state. Like, this whole thing is so stupid. Like, they just go from one shitty town to like a slightly shittier town. To hide out with their what seems like is hundreds of dollars that they got.
It's like $700. Yeah,
from this bookstore robbery. The whole thing is so low stakes. It is so funny. But anyway, so like in the most literal sense, this movie's called Bottle Rocket, and Zach just referred to. There's a scene where Dignan is depressed and lighting off a bunch of fireworks in the daylight in an open field. There's also that great moment where he throws a firecracker and it scares Inez, and he turns and like glares at her. Yeah, like he's like, but there's a scene, a montage of them on the lam where they stop at a fireworks booth and get a bunch of fireworks, and Dignan is excitedly lighting off bottle rockets out of the car window and throwing firecrackers and stuff. But even in that little documentary, they talk about the title, and I think it's Andrew Wilson who's like says, I don't really know what the significance of the title is. I think this gets back to the kind of shifting status among Anthony and Dignan in their dynamic, where it's like kind of, is the tail walking the dog, who's leading who? And I do think it is somewhat fluid between them. Anthony is the protagonist of this movie, I would say, because he is the character who changes the most.
I agree. So that's what the producer said too. Richard, I forget his name.
Sakai?
Yes. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. He was the only person who made that point.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so just in like terms of like what we think of in the structure of a movie, right? It's about like, in the most bare bones sense, like a story is about a character changing. And Anthony is definitely the character who like grows and changes the most, I would say, in this movie. But again, I think Owen Wilson kind of cleverly has written himself the starring role of this movie. You're talking about I first wanted to say this when you were talking about how Dignan displays some competency at different points. So it's probably obvious where I'm going with this. I do think the bottle rocket, it refers to Dignan, right? It's this thing that he's not just stupid or just pathetic or whatever. It's like he has a charisma, he has a leadership quality, but he's like directionless. He doesn't.
When he gets mad, it's a little bit intimidating. It's a little intimidating. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's not totally hollow.
I do think that both of these guys are probably like have grown up in an environment where they've like had to like scrap or whatever.
Yeah.
And I could see, like you were saying, in your little character background, I could see either thing. I could see either one of them having saved the other's ass at a different point. But like, yeah, I think the bottle rocket of the title does refer to Dignan and just this like this bright, aimless,
sweet
shooting star, you know, it kind of it's better to burn out to fade away type of energy where it's like it's never going to end well for this guy one way or another, but he is driven in a certain sense. And as far as like why they hang out with Dignan, I feel like this guy always had something for them to do. They're in like clearly a boring place. They are like, these people are so bored with their lives. And Dignan, I guarantee from the second that they met him, always had a bunch of shit for them to do. And I think that just, and that is also, I think, like, again, gets back to like, do you choose your friends or do you just get stuck with the people who happen to like live on the same block as you or work at the same place as you, whatever it is, right? Or your moms were friends. Like, do you actually choose your friends, or are they just, is it all just timing and space? And that, I think, gets into the tiresomeness of Dignan that Anthony has, where it's like, I've outgrown this, but I can't, because this is the guy who always came up with something for us to do. And now we're still just doing the stupid shit that he came up with for us to do, you know? But that also does display that at least at some point in my mind, I do think Dignan was actually the leader of this group. And maybe he's not anymore, and he's holding on to that, and that's where a lot of the trouble that they get into kind of starts.
Yeah, I could definitely see them as like a 3-pack in high school, and like diverting briefly in like 8th grade or freshman year, but like coming back together. Like maybe Anthony was on the football team and got caught smoking weed, and like had to like take a year off and went back with like Dignan and Bob or something like that. I don't know. I mean, Anthony is like definitely the glue between Dignan and Bob. Their history goes back really far, but I think Anthony sees more promise in him. Or in
Dignan and Bob don't like each other.
Dignan and Bob don't like each other, but their history goes back.
I think I think it's what you're saying. I think that they're both friends with Anthony, and so they like, it's kind of like, as you referred to Masha and Rupert. I think there's a little bit of a marriage of convenience between Bob and Dignan, where it's just like, well, we both like, we're Anthony's two friends.
I also think,
Zach, I mentioned working at the school. This is a dynamic I see a lot between groups of 3 at school. I'm working with 4th and 5th graders, and I'll think the 3 of them are best friends, and then find out 2 of the 3 like cannot stand each other. They just both really like the third person. And the third person likes both of them. And I'm just like, that's wild. Like, literally, I had 2 girls telling me how they don't like each other. And I was like, how long has this been going on? And they said, since 2nd grade. And I went, you guys hang out all the time. And I'm just going to make up a name for the third person. They went, yeah, we both like Mary. Yeah. Like I'm a fucking idiot, right? Like, yeah, obviously that's the price we pay for getting to hang out with Mary.
I just want to say, I mean, I love how much we've talked about. I want to talk about one other amazing thing that Owen Wilson does as I don't know if it's an acting technique or just something that they came up with on the day, but during the robbery that eventually goes awry. Oh, there's another like cool Wes Anderson thing. The logo that's painted on Hinckley Cold Storage feels like a Wes Anderson font. So there's these little what would you call them? There's these little like visual previews of what you're going to get in later movies. But
including the opening title card.
Which I think is very Clockwork Orange. And if I had to say one movie that in Kubrick's catalog that reminds me the most of Wes Anderson, or vice versa, it'd be Clockwork Orange from a visuals perspective.
Sure.
At any rate, Owen Wilson does this amazing thing during the robbery that goes awry that is sort of something Walker and I quote to each other. It's impossible to quote like through text, but they have this tag along that is a protege of Mr. Henry, supposedly, who's meant to crack the safe. And you could tell Owen Wilson is really anxious about this guy's like participation and like
he's
level
an old, very old Indian man named Kumar. And Owen Wilson during the whole like front half of the robbery is anxious about Kumar's level of engagement and keeps checking on him by shouting his name. Kumar. Can you do it, Walker? Keep up the intensity, Kumar.
Kumar. Where's Kumar? Yeah, he's just worried. And Kumar is meant to crack the safe.
Do you think Dignan is Dignan's like subconsciously is Dignan's first clue that Mr. Henry's fucking them over?
Oh, maybe
them getting saddled with Kumar.
Or
do you think it's like more of a? Do you think it's more like generous? Like he's actually like worried about the old guy on the crew.
I think it's generous.
Looking
and I think
after
that.
him.
I think it's that, and I also think that it's like the first time we see how when you like. Maybe I don't know if this is a good but I've had it where I make like broad assumptions about people's level of depth, not a lot, but like, and then something will happen where you'll have a conversation or you'll see something and you're like, oh no, they're like a person with like anxiety and like a lot. I don't know.
Right. They become like a full human to you.
Yeah, when you're shitty and you have a negative assumption about somebody is basically what I'm saying. But like, I don't know. I think that in that moment you really see a lot of Dignan's internal anxiety and insecurity, and it's very funny. But it's cool because it's like you see just like the depth of this person. And I don't know, maybe I'm pulling too much out of that.
No, I love that. I love that.
Yeah,
I mean, because I don't think Dignan is like a bad guy. I think he's like a low on self-awareness and pushy and manipulative and dishonest. But like, I don't think think he's like knowingly trying to fuck people over. I think that it's kind of like through his blind spots and ineptitude. I mean, also, Zach, the part you're talking about, we should just say, again, if you haven't seen the movie, the big job that they pull in the end that it is almost slapstick in terms of how wrong it goes and how funny
very anxiety
that scene is.
Though, but
it's
so funny.
Very anxiety. And it's also very Coen Brothers in terms
very
of
much so.
Like how often crime, like we're so used in movies to seeing like criminal masterminds and
just smoothness, like Fast and the Furious.
Smoothness, yeah, and just 10 steps ahead and everything is perfectly predicted and executed. And then it's like in real life, like read your fucking police report of your town or city the night before. It's full of just like poorly planned crimes being poorly executed. And, and often people like dying as a result of that or whatever.
It's much darker in Fargo, but it reminds me of the clunkiness of them kidnapping the wife in Fargo.
Exactly.
How it's like they peek in on the windows. The Bottle Rocket has more comedy to it. Please go ahead. Sorry.
No, not at all. But I was just going to say, just in terms of plot mechanics, this whole big job that they're failing at, it turns out is actually so Mr. Henry can rob Bob's house. It's just to get rid of all of them. So... And Mr. Henry, the criminal mastermind, this is what he does. It's just like, this is the level of caper that he's pulling off. This is the guy Dignan idolizes. It's very funny. And I'm interrupting myself, but for the first time I noticed, Dignan is in love with Mr. Henry, and Mr. Henry just is Dignan. He's ever slightly more successful than Dignan.
That's why I think Dignan was raised by a single mother too. Is he treats Mr. Henry like the father he never had, which is heartbreaking.
Totally. Oh yeah. All just to say, I'm saying all this just so I could say one of the funniest lines in the movie about Kumar. So, like Mr. Henry saddles him with this supposed safe cracker who can't crack the safe. There is one of the most hilarious cuts I've ever seen where everything has gone wrong in the robbery. There's a smoke bomb has gone off. The alarm is Dignan threw out a smoke bomb in a panic. Somebody's having a heart attack. Like everything is going wrong. It's total chaos. Dignan runs in to see if Kumar has at least opened the safe. And this old man is just sitting in the room, staring off into space with an unopened safe. And then it cuts. I'm not going to do the accent, but he has a very heavy Indian accent, and it cuts to them in the elevator, and Dignan is going to Kumar. What were you doing in there, man? And he's going, I don't know, man. I don't know. And he goes, I don't know. I lose my touch. I lose my touch. And then Dignan goes, did you ever have a touch to lose, man? Which I think is one of the funniest lines in the whole movie.
So I have a question for you, and I think this is almost an intentional omission and not meant to be buttoned up. But what happens? So this is a genuine question. As much as I've seen the movie, and I've been wondering this for years.
I bet I know what you're going to ask. Applejack?
Okay, so Walker already said that he gave Dignan this job and saddled him with Kumar, basically to take as long as he could. He doesn't care if the robbery goes well or not, but he needs them away from Bob's house so that they can rob it, right? And Applejack, who's somebody that goes along with the robbery, this is another Wes Anderson thing, is to have people named nouns that are just around, which also funny. Feels like a Coen-influenced choice, but I don't actually know. But at any rate, the robbery goes awry, and Bob's gun goes off, and Applejack pretends he's shot, or that he's having a heart attack.
Well, actually, I guess it's an open question for me, too. Is the heart attack a diversion?
I think it is. But he couldn't have planned that, though.
I kind of was more this watch leaning to that it's just another thing that's going wrong. Because Applejack is in the hospital afterwards.
Well, that's why his case got dismissed, though, which makes it sound like he's in league with Mr. Henry, but maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, I think he is, but I don't even think him locking Dignan out of the car is
that's what I was going to say. Like, why would he do that?
Because I don't think it benefits Mr. Henry to have there be police attention on this robbery. I think it's more what you said, that it's like the robbery can be successful or not, and it doesn't really make any difference. The con is that they're going to rob Bob's house. Mm-hmm. So I kind of was this time leaning towards it is an organic thing that actually happens.
Okay.
And even him, because Dignan goes in, rescues him, puts him in the VW bus, right?
Which is so cool. He does
it's a super cool car. And and then he does that. Yes. It's one of the few unselfish things you see Dignan do throughout the movie.
It's very brave.
And he puts him in the car, and Applejack locks the door and then doesn't let him in, and then, he's arrested.
The police come, yeah.
But I don't know. I think it's kind of just because Applejack wouldn't want to be sitting there when the police get there.
Right. So that's why I can't figure why he'd lock it.
I think it's just a reflex. And he is genuinely in need of medical attention and not really thinking. And it's just another thing that is going wrong in this colossal fuck up.
So I love that. I think that's great. And that totally satisfies me, because I was like, if it's not, I don't think it's like they made some error. I think if it's just meant to confuse you, that's fine. The last part, not the last part, but the one thing I wanted to highlight, it's just kind of occurring to me now. I've always really liked the scene of, so like Walker just said, he drops Applejack. The sirens are coming right there. It's the end of the line. He has a big old gun on his belt that he, has no intention of using, I don't think, to actually, like, Dignan isn't a murderer, but he runs back into Hinckley Cold Storage as the police are coming, and they beat the shit out of him. It's not a particularly graphic scene, but it's like cut really well. And it's not, I don't know. It's interesting because it's just like, I almost feel like it's like, not to over embellish everything, is it like sort of Dignan like losing his virginity in a way finally, or something like that? Because it's very like visceral, and like he doesn't look totally ungrateful about what's happening. Maybe not losing his virginity, and it's not a sexual scene.
No, but it feels like, cool.
Is this sort of like Dignan's next step into manhood? Because we never see him have any chemistry. I don't think Dignan is gay. I think Dignan has never had any luck, and is sort of, maybe he's had sex like once. Like,
I wouldn't even go that far, but I definitely don't get the impression this is somebody who would be like gifted in the dating or sex arena.
Yeah, and this scene feels
because he's
like
lacking self-awareness. Like, I mean, he just is like he's not good at picking up people's like signals.
No, and I love the police. There's a really great use of music, as Wes Anderson has always done and continues to do, of a Rolling Stones song that, like, I'm so glad they could only get the rights to like lower tier songs, because it's such a great song. It's off of their failed Sgt. Pepper imitator album. But you hear the police because Dignan has his big old Magnum like tucked in his belt.
Is the song.
Yeah.
Such a great song.
Oh, daddy. But anyways, you hear the police go, drop the gun, asshole. Like he doesn't even realize that he represents a huge existential threat to them with like a giant ass gun in his belt. And it's not a joyful scene of him getting the shit kicked out of him, but it does feel like, and you can kind of see the police talking to him like, why'd you do it, son? You got your whole life. Like is what I imagine the dialogue to be as they're loading him into the car. It's a really interesting way to see your secondary protagonist like get, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. It's just such an interesting scene.
Well, it's one of 3 scenes of people getting the shit beat out of them in this movie, which does lead me to believe that like these guys are like younger than our dad, but like not by a ton. And like our parents
they're like 1970
are like,
probably.
Yeah,
when they were born.
Our parents are like they're like the youngest that like boomers are, right?
The last year, yeah.
Yeah, so it does make me kind of think of our dad and like just that generation of boys, I think especially kind of just out roaming the streets and like getting into fights and doing dumb shit or whatever. I do feel like that, and the Texas of it all. Like the kind of like these guys are kind of like dorks and like social misfits, but there still is like a time and also like the like place of like this good old boys like energy where it very much seems to be like a part of these guys' life and upbringing to me is like having to get the shit beat out of you at like different points. And 2 of those things happen in the background. This movie is so good at hilarious scenes. Zach talked about the scene where Anthony is getting hit on. And in the background of that entire scene, and Anthony, no one is reacting to it. Not the girl, not Anthony or Dignan.
Well, she kind of looks back once.
You hear Bob getting beaten in the background by his brother for leaving a leaf in the pool that he was supposed to clean. And again, that very Wes Anderson-y shot of a hand holding a leaf, and you only see the hand, and it's perfectly in the center of the frame. And you hear Future Man go, what the fuck is this about the leaf? And then goes out and beats the shit out of Bob. And you hear Bob scream, ow, my ear. And he has a bandage on his ear for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, that feels like a very Coen or King of Comedy choice too, with the tape on the nose and the injury that's never explained. It's a little bit, it's cool.
It's so great. And then also when Dignan gets beat up at the bar, that is all happening in the background of the shot behind Anthony and Inez having a conversation about their communication.
Which, just from a filmmaking perspective, the timing of that is incredible because you're focused on Anthony and Inez, and Anthony is expressing insecurity about not being able to speak Spanish because some former boyfriend or dude who thinks Inez is hot, which she is really hot. I'd never really noticed that before this actually either.
Yeah, she's super
is like motor mouthing at her, and it's all in Spanish, and Anthony is insecure because
and she's laughing.
Yes, and then in the background though, you see. It's really well timed. Dignan get his ass kicked by this like cool Mexican dude in a bar where he has no business being. Yeah. And it's just the timing of that is really, really cool.
And they'd made super fast like drunken bar friends like moments ago.
Yeah.
I love Anthony's reaction to that guy talking to Inez. And it seems really innocent, but there's like clearly like chemistry of either a friendship or whatever, like or more there. And they're just talking in Spanish, and it's like probably like 45 seconds, 60 seconds long.
It's really
and
short.
The guy walks away, and Anthony goes, boy, that guy was a real chatterbox, wasn't he? I didn't think he was ever going to stop with the story there. Zach, I want to make sure that we talk about just like a few scenes. Sure. And again, like clearly Zach and I love to quote this movie. I don't want to necessarily put that, but I just feel like there are scenes that I can't talk about this movie and not acknowledge my favorite scenes. Mainly, first of all, second scene of this movie is after the mental hospital, the bus, Dignan is laying out what is referred to later as the 75-year plan. But it's like the movie just hits the ground running in such a great way of they meet up and it's like, okay, here's our plan. Like, here's how we're going to be criminals. That's what the plan is, right? And it's a notebook, and it's doing close-ups on the notebook very quickly, but you're able to like quickly read hilarious things. I paused it and wrote down a bunch of stuff on the notebook. And some of them that I saw for the first time, believe it or not, or at least don't remember seeing. But I didn't write down everything, but some of the funniest things from the 75-year plan. Do you want to hear?
Yeah, please.
So I wrote them in the chronological order that they're displayed. Okay, the first page says initial. I've died. These are so funny to me. And it's so Wes Anderson-y, the way this stuff is written out. And Owen, yes. But this is like one of those moments where I'm like, this is like this is the seeds of like close-ups of kind of funny objects is like something that you will see for the rest of his career. But initial 5 years, through constant regimen of activities, we begin to learn a craft, is the first thing that it says on this. Okay, then cultivate relationship with Abe Henry. That is a hilarious sentence.
It's sad.
and now they're getting broken down and they're like lettered. D, second 5 years. 1, make wise investments. 2, the Robin Hood principle. A, establish goodwill within community. B, anonymous donations. E, develop outside interests. A, travel. B, art. C, science. Okay. This is again, listeners, what cannot be stressed enough is what we see them do in this movie is rob Anthony's house. So they rob one of the two protagonist parents, rob a bookstore, and then fail at this cold storage robbery. And that's what we see carried out from this plan that we're seeing written out. And then the last page that we see says living in, and also while Dignan is showing all this, he's being like super like business and like almost like militaristic, almost militant about how he's laying all this out. And you're just hearing Anthony mumbling like, wow, you've really got it well planned out. Like, you know, just
next 50.
The next 50. And then the last page says living into the 21st century. Okay. Hilarious. It says H, Anthony, as you know, there can be no way of looking this far ahead. 1, remain flexible. 2, don't be too derogatory, which to me perfectly sets up their dynamic that it's like, I know that you're gonna try to deviate from the plan or like shit talk the plan. Right now I'm saying you need to like stick with me on this. Oh, yeah. Also another page, Zach, this is so funny. The next 25 years. Obviously, these years will be heavily influenced by the years that preceded them.
It's almost like a shooting script for like Dignan's life.
It's so crazy. The next 25 years, obviously, these years will be heavily influenced by the years that preceded them. Like, what does that mean?
I think it's speaking to their dynamic.
Right.
I don't know.
Also on that page, you don't see, it says, remember what Huey Long said. You don't see what Huey Long said, but it's an influence on Dignan and his plan. Let's just let's go tit for tat. Like, is there a particular scene that I wonder if we have the same favorites. There's a comedy set piece for me that is my favorite scene of this movie. But what is there a scene that you want to call out or a moment?
Probably the moment where they are planning the robbery of the bookstore.
Favorite scene of the movie.
That's my favorite scene in the movie because it's after they bought the gun and you really see the dynamics of everything we've discussed, you know, which is in the movie or if it's in
the gun that they've bought because it's the biggest gun. It's not said outright, but clearly it shows them shooting a ton of guns, and then the biggest one is the one that they're like, yeah, this is the gun.
Yeah, and they're planning out and you see like Anthony is more responsible because Dignan starts getting hot about the gun being passed around, and Anthony grabs it and is like, hey, hold on, like we need to like have our emotions and guns be separate, which I really like. And then they get into a verbal spat. And this is one of the things I love. James L. Brooks said that he would ADR specific funny Owen Wilson lines into a scene. And you hear Anthony and Dignan have to go out of the room to kind of calm Dignan down. And their argument ends with, how does an asshole like Bob get such a great house? And then they come back into the room as if it solved everything. Yeah. And the thing I love so much is that Dignan says, I'm the one, Anthony, you're the star, Bob, you're the zero.
No, you're close. It's like, all right, so you see the star. They're looking at like Dignan's map. And again, like the 75-year plan, there are shots of this, and it's like and through dialogue, a brilliant dialogue, it is revealed like how insanely ambitious and over the top this plan is. But yeah, it's all right, so you see the star. Here is me, Anthony. You're the X, Bob. You're the 0 out here in the car. But yeah, and it's a fight.
Is that your favorite comedic set piece? Or
that scene is the best scene of the movie. It is so funny. It's also in the short, and I feel like it's the funniest scene in the original short too, because it's a fight that only people who have known each other for like 20 years would have, where everyone's like, you know what I mean? Like they're so comfortable yelling at each other, and you immediately see them as like it reminded me of being like in my high school band where it's just like everyone's just like yelling at each other and shit. Like boys are so like loud and mean and dumb, but it's mostly between Dignan and Bob, and Anthony's kind of having to peacekeep. But what they're fighting about is Bob won't stop picking up the gun while Dignan is explaining the plan. And
how much bullets does this thing take?
How much bullets does this thing take? What? I'm paying attention. God damn it! You're not paying attention if you're messing around with the gun. And then Anthony,
and that's when Anthony takes it away to have to be like, "Hey guys, whoa."
I love the line too of put the gun on the table. Put the gun on the table. I can't focus unless the gun is on the table.
I know. Owen Wilson is such a fucking good actor. Like that. Also, it's so lived in.
Anthony's kind of being insubordinate too, because you hear again background over, like all three of them are talking at the same time, but quietly in the dialogue mix, you hear Anthony go, "It's not just your gun, Dignan, it's all of ours," which is hilarious.
Yeah, I know.
But what did I want to say? Oh, there's also again revealing how overly complicated the plan is. There's a point during the fight where you see Anthony pick up the papers, that all the plans are drawn out on it. And Anthony goes, whoa, are the explosives really necessary here? I think it'd be a lot simpler if I just walked up to the guy. And again, I think all of this is so funny compared to what you see them do, which is walk up to the door, wave a gun in a guy's face, and take the like hundreds of dollars in cash that there are at this bookstore.
Yeah.
The ambition of the plan versus what you see executed is so funny.
It's so funny. And I think in the robbery, you see a nice like distillation of what we were talking about of like Anthony kind of getting his way really easily, because he walks up to this bookstore that's closing or they're closed, but they're closing. And he says, I left my sweater in there. And the guy goes, "Can't you come back for it?" And he goes, I can't. And the guy just goes, "Okay, well, why don't you come inside and wait here?" Which it's like, fuck you, Anthony. But like, it feels very genuine. And then Dignan just walks up trying to ride the coattails of their good interaction. And the guy goes, "Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. What are you doing?" It's so funny. Like Dignan is not smooth ever.
No, and it's all unnecessary because what they do is just point the whole play acting of the sweater that was left inside is completely unnecessary because once Dignan gets close to the guy, just puts the gun in his face, which is all he or Anthony had to do in the first. So the sweater is all just a totally unnecessary diversion that helps them in no way. Yeah. "I left my sweater in here." Yeah, we got a sweater situation. It reminds me of, I think I said this in our King of Comedy episode, that and the yellow jumpsuits that they're all wearing during the Hinckley cold storage robbery reminds me of how wearing the blind glasses and having the blind canes in King of Comedy is a completely unnecessary added detail to their caper in that too. It's really funny. I mean, the scenes that I was like, as far as just set pieces that I wanted to make sure we talked about were the planning of the robbery and the Hinckley cold storage robbery. We talked about both of those, but there's another just joke of this movie that I want to call out that I think is maybe my favorite single joke.
Sure.
Which is, we referenced Anthony has a much younger sister, unclear. I get second marriage kid vibes, probably. But, you know, he has this moment where he has to tell like his sister that he's going to be leaving, and she's kind of like has more awareness about what a bad influence and dynamic him and Dignan have with each other.
I think she's parroting her parents.
For sure.
Especially with the "you've never worked a day in your life, how would you know what exhaustion is?" That sounds like something she picked up from her mom and dad saying.
Yeah, for sure.
But go ahead. Please go ahead.
But yeah, I would say, so sister's probably like 10 to 12 years old, somewhere in that, junior high. Mm-hmm. And Anthony's really hurt by the conversation they have, where she basically is just like, it's not the dialogue of the movie, but like what's intonated is like, what the hell are you doing with your life? Mm-hmm. And it's a younger sibling being disappointed in an older sibling, and it really hurts him. And it cuts to him kind of freaking out, having like an existential crisis about what am I doing? And Dignan is trying to talk him down and be encouraging. And Anthony goes, Anthony, about his sister Grace, goes, "She thinks I'm a failure." And Dignan goes, "She called you a failure? What's she ever accomplished with her life that's so great, man? Nothing. This is like a 10-year-old child.
Well,
that's possibly my favorite single joke in the movie. And Dignan is 100% earnest in that comeback.
It's interesting that that's your favorite part, because my favorite kind of like micro comedy moment that I would like to even just close on personally is in that scene and then following it. It's so, there's a few scenes like this. Like there's one where Anthony has to break up a fight and he holds Dignan back, and you see Owen Wilson go, "Oh, he popped my back." Just like little incidental things. But in that scene that Walker just talked about, he said, Dignan goes, "What's she ever accomplished with her life that's so great?" And this is before we've met Abe Henry. And you get the feeling that he's been doing this. He goes, "Let me show you something. Let me show you." And he shows him a picture of he and Mr. Henry together. And you hear Anthony off screen go, "Oh, come on, Dignan." And then they get back in the car, and Bob is kind of recklessly driving, although you can only see the three of them in the car, and you see Anthony start to get anxious and like build up tension because they're going fast. And then you hear a car horn honk, and he goes, "That was a stop sign back there." But it's so great because you see Anthony anticipating the running of the stop sign. I'd never noticed it before but he goes like this, and then it happens. Those are my favorite too.
I also love that scene too, because we haven't talked about Bob a ton, but what I also love is that out of the three of them, Bob is the one that like no one listens to. Like both of them kind of dismiss Bob.
Beat up on Bob.
Yeah, they kind of.
Bob, what the
hell? And also, I want to call out too, this movie has a beautiful style of editing where they do a thing at several times throughout the movie where they will edit together several different locations and scenes, but it flows as one conversation. And the scene we're talking about where Anthony's freaking out, him and Dignan are outside the car and Bob is in the car. And that scene ends with Bob going, "I hate to interrupt your guys' conversation." Cut. They're in the car and Bob goes, "But I think I know what you've been going through, man, because I've been through some pretty heavy shit myself." And like, there's so many scenes like that where it all,
and that's what he tells us. He says, "My older brother beats the shit out of me all the time."
Yeah. Well, and I also love to, again, that kind of very natural and Coen brothers dialogue where people are not nearly as clever in real life and how they talk with the way Bob repeat. And in real life, people kind of repeat themselves or get stuck. I do it all the time on this podcast. I get stuck on a word and I'm like, why can't I think of a synonym for this word right now? And the way Bob goes, I mean, I know I have it memorized. It's like, "But I think I know what you've been going through, man, because I've been through some pretty fucked up shit myself. If you're feeling alone, like nobody cares, nobody in the fucking world gives a shit." And meanwhile, in the back, Anthony's going, "That's a stop sign." And like, no one's listening to Bob.
There's a stop sign back there.
Yeah. And it's like, he's clearly like pouring his heart out about like what a miserable person he is. And nobody is listening to it. But I just love that. If you're feeling alone, like nobody in the world cares and nobody in the fucking world gives a shit. Like to repeat world twice like that, but you just escalate it to gives a shit.
Well, I want to credit you really quick with something. I think like, and this is truly my last thing. We can go as long as you want, but Walker, I think this might come from like doing comedy or sitting through a ton of stand-up is you start to realize what people's fixations are. And you can do this without doing comedy, but I'm sure that maybe like sharpened that instinct, right? Or observation. There's a scene, and it's within this scene, it's actually a little bit back, but where Anthony is rattled from the dismissal and sort of whatever that Grace gave him about what he's doing with his life. As he's jumping back into the car, you have no context for it. You hear Dignan telling Bob, when I was a little kid, I wanted to know what caused thunder, which is so funny. But I remember Walker and I were talking about that. But it's said
like whatever he's talking about, it's clearly it's some sort of brag and self-mythologizing about like what a inquisitive, smart, curious, special guy he is.
Yeah, and we've always
when I was a little kid, I wanted to know what caused thunder.
Yeah, and that's where it gets cut off because Anthony goes, "Can we just go, please?" And Walker's like, "That is very similar to one of his funniest lines in Zoolander when we're meeting and getting to know Hansel. When I was a kid, I was more interested in knowing what bark on a tree was made out of."
Lots of the other kids, they wanted to be astronauts, but I was more interested in what bark on a tree was made out of.
It's so great. And Walker was like, that's like an Owen Wilson thing, is to like talk about something in nature that is totally known. And like, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Or elevating your depth.
And just like, I feel like it is a thing that people do it's like, let me kind of through an inane anecdote display to you how interesting I am is like a very human behavior.
Yeah, so that's all. That's
and Dignan just is not. Dignan is less good at. Maybe people are able to do it in more subtle ways, but he just has no self-awareness. So he's just bragging about how he wanted to know what caused thunder when he was a little kid, and it's like he doesn't finish the anecdote. But I don't speculate that it's followed up with him finding out what causes thunder.
It's just
like it's just cool that he wonders. Yeah.
And the fact that they left that in, and you were talking about how brilliant the editing is. I mean, that's a way that people will critique movies often, is that like, oh, well, they're having this conversation across different locations. It's intentionally movie-like and unrealistic, and it is beautifully edited, as you said. But there's so many listeners, if you haven't watched it in a while, please go back and watch it. If it's a movie you love, but you know, it's been a while, or if you have been with us this long and haven't seen it, my God, we must be very interesting. But it's just such a treasure. Taught me so much about understanding humor in detail, and I really like to think that it influenced my sense of humor overall. And I know that I love it because of the brothers aspect. So, you know, yeah, it's such a great piece of art. As silly as that could sound, it's totally true in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the brothers thing feels really, really lived in. And again, it's like family is a pretty, you know, certainly not specific to Wes Anderson, but it certainly is a theme that he seems really, really interested in his work overall. And I think it's very on display in this movie. Brothers and brother dynamics specifically is the
Tenenbaums for sure.
Central. Yes. And I was going to say though, but is also the kind of central, area of exploration of the Darjeeling Limited, which I know you're not a big fan of, but I really like for that same reason, the way it captures the way like brothers love each other and are mean to each other. And I don't know. I mean, is that kind of the Wes Anderson thing? I think he really likes exploring love between people who don't know how to express it very well. You know, because that seems like kind of what all of Royal Tenenbaums is it's like all these like very smart but emotionally stunted people who love each other and are not gifted at expressing it, and so you instead get to see the way they kind of like torture each other, you know?
Yeah, and it's a great way of being like not saying like the way that will sometimes be like, oh, it's fine because it could be worse. Like that is a terrible axiom and philosophy to live your life by. But I do feel like but there is a part of you though, a part of me, I should say, where I'm like, yeah, that's not a good way to live your life because if things could always be worse, then we'll never progress. But you do at a certain point go, okay, well, that's not how I'm going to adopt and like raise my kids or live, you know, exist in my marriage or whatever. But things really could be worse. And I do need to appreciate where they're okay. And I feel like in Tenenbaums and in this movie, he like, especially in Tenenbaums, he does that with like Ben Stiller's character. and like Chaz and the way he and Owen Wilson's character, forget his name,
Richie.
The way he and Richie like kind of
no, Richie is hold on.
Luke Wilson.
Eli is Owen Wilson.
The way he and Eli both acknowledge they need help for different reasons at the end, and he does like have this like healed relationship with his dad, even though his dad didn't actually change that much. So I think he's really good at being like, things are what they are, and we do need to improve that and acknowledge we need help, but we're not going to ever fix it all, essentially. Yeah, that's all.
I think it's a nice moment to end on. I really adore this movie. I love talking about it with you. I will say, I guess just one last thing I'll say is that when I watched it, I was like a little bit kind of like, do I really need to like sit down and watch a movie I've seen like 30 times right now? It was 2 minutes into it that I was just like, oh, it's just washing over me. I'm laughing out loud, and I'm legitimately noticing things that I hadn't noticed other times I watched it. It really just keeps aging with me. I hope I could show it to Ollie someday. Like, absolutely. If you're listening to this because you're and I've had the experience of showing it to multiple people, not showing it like they weren't aware of its existence, but I've been with multiple people who like Wes Anderson's movies a lot, the ones immediately following this a ton, and just had never gotten around to this. And it's very, very satisfying. It is one of those movies where it's like I have to kind of strain to not like watch people's reactions to every part I like, but it's really, really satisfying to see it hit. So if you have a friend in your life who hasn't gotten around to this one but likes this kind of thing, strongly recommend that experience. And yeah, 100%. Man, I'm just really glad I got to watch it again and talk about it with you.
Yeah, me too. I loved it.
We're going to be back doing Fiona again next week. In the meantime, thank you for listening to our movie episodes. It really makes me happy that people roll with this when we want to do it. And I feel like this one, I hope, was an extra treat for the folks who have been riding with us since the beginning, since you got a mini episode of our Radiohead season in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in the meantime, we will see you next week on a Friday. I have been Walker Glenn.
I'm Zach Glenn.
Talk to you soon, listeners. Bye.
Bye.
Idiotalk is a Glenn Brothers production. Get in touch with us at idiotalk.podcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at idiotalk.podcast. And thanks for listening to